Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Eleanor Fairmont, and I need to tell you what happened in the Daniel Boone National Forest in October of 1963. I've been a park ranger for 16 years now. I've saved over 200 people from these mountains. Before that day, I never believed in ghost stories. I thought they were just old mountain tales that scared tourists. I'm 39 years old, and I've spent most of my life in these Kentucky hills. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell me stories about hungry spirits that lived in the caves. "They steal the living to replace the dead," she would whisper. I never listened. I was too busy learning how to climb rocks and rescue lost hikers. The Red River Gorge is my area. It's 45 miles from the nearest real town, and when you're out there alone, you might as well be on the moon. The limestone cliffs rise up like castle walls, full of caves and hidden places where sound bounces in strange ways. Most people think it's beautiful. I used to think so too. That October morning started like any other. The leaves were turning gold and red, and there was frost on the grass that crunched under my boots. A thick fog hung in the hollows between the hills, the kind that makes everything look like a ghost story. But fog is just water in the air. That's what I told myself. I was checking the Gray's Arch Trail system when my radio crackled to life. "Eleanor, we've got a problem," came the voice of Sheriff Martin from down in town. "School group from Louisville went missing last night. 12 kids, ages 6 to 12. 2 adult chaperones found this morning, unconscious. They don't remember anything." My stomach dropped. Missing kids were the worst kind of emergency. "Where's their last known location?" I asked, already heading back toward my truck. "Campsite near Devil's Kitchen." The chaperones say they all went to sleep around 9 o'clock. When they woke up this morning, every single child was gone. I grabbed my climbing gear, first aid kit, and extra rope. In 16 years of rescue work, I'd seen kids wander off and get lost. I'd seen them fall into creeks or get trapped in small caves. But 12 kids disappearing at once? That was different. The campsite looked normal enough when I got there. 12 small sleeping bags were laid out in a neat circle around the cold ashes of a campfire. The bags were empty, but they didn't look disturbed. No signs of a struggle, no torn fabric or scattered belongings. It was like the children had just melted away into the air. I walked around the edges of the camp, looking for tracks. The ground was soft from morning dew, perfect for footprints, and I found them, small shoe prints heading away from the camp in a neat line, like the kids had been playing follow the leader. But here's where things got strange. The footprints led straight toward a limestone cliff face that rose up about 30 feet high. As I followed them, they got clearer and deeper, like the kids had been walking faster. Then, about 10 feet from the solid rock wall, the tracks just stopped. Not like they turned around and went somewhere else. They stopped mid-step, like the children had been walking and then just vanished into thin air. I stared at that cliff face for a long time, looking for any crack or opening they could have squeezed through. Nothing. Just solid stone that had been there for millions of years. I radioed for backup and started checking my equipment. My rope, my flashlight, my compass, everything looked normal. But when I clicked on my flashlight to peer into a small cave opening nearby, the beam seemed to bend wrong, like it was shining through water instead of air. That's when I heard it. Very faint, coming from somewhere inside the rock itself, the sound of children singing. It was an old song, something I'd never heard before, but it made my skin crawl. The voices were high and sweet, but there was something wrong with them. They echoed in a way that didn't make sense, like they were coming from very far away and very close at the same time. I turned off my flashlight and listened hard. The singing stopped. When I turned the light back on, there was a small handprint in the condensation on the cave wall. A child's hand, but it faded away even as I watched. For the first time in 16 years, I felt something I didn't want to admit. Fear. Real, cold fear that started in my stomach and spread out like ice water in my veins. But I'm a park ranger. I save people. And somewhere in these hills, 12 children were counting on me to find them. I just didn't know yet that they weren't the only children lost in these caves. I called in Ranger Jenkins from the North Station. Billy Jenkins had been working these mountains almost as long as I had, and he knew how to handle scared parents and search parties. While I waited for him to arrive, I decided to follow the cliff face and look for any opening the kids might have found. The fog was getting thicker, which was strange because the sun was climbing higher. Usually mountain fog burns off by late morning, but this stuff seemed to be getting worse. It clung to the limestone walls like wet cotton, and it was cold, colder than October fog should be. I found the opening about 100 yards from where the tracks ended. It was small, maybe 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. A tight squeeze for an adult, but easy enough for a child. I clicked on my flashlight and peered inside. The cave tunnel went back about 20 feet before opening up into something bigger. I could feel air moving, which meant it connected to other passages. In the beam of my light, I could see more handprints on the walls, fresh ones. The children had definitely been here. I radioed my position and crawled inside. The tunnel was tight, and my jacket scraped against the rough limestone, but I've been in tighter spots. What bothered me was the temperature. It was getting colder as I went deeper, and I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. When I emerged into the larger chamber, I stopped and stared. The cave was big enough to stand up in, maybe 30 feet across. But that's not what made me freeze. It was the drawings on the walls. Someone had carved pictures into the stone. Pictures of children holding hands in a circle. Above them, other children floated in the air with their arms outstretched. And at the bottom, there were dates. 1,890, 1,913, 1,936, 1,959, every 23 years. I knew about the mining disaster in 1890. Everyone around here did. A cave-in had trapped dozens of families, including 23 children. They never found all the bodies, but I'd never seen these drawings before, and I'd explored most of the caves in this area. "Hello?" I called out. "Is anyone here? My name is Eleanor. I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help you." Fess. My voice echoed strangely, like it was bouncing off walls that weren't there. And then, from somewhere deeper in the cave system, I heard a child's voice answer back. "We're here, Miss Eleanor. We've been waiting for you." The voice was sweet and polite, like a little girl in Sunday school, but it was coming from a tunnel that led even deeper into the mountain. And when I shined my light that way, I could see it was blocked by fallen rocks. No way a child could be back there. "Where are you, honey?" I called. "I need you to keep talking so I can find you." "We're in the deep place," came the answer. "Where the coal used to be, where we've always been." I felt the hair on my arms stand up. The coal mine from 1,890 was sealed up 70 years ago. It was supposed to be completely blocked off. But if the children had somehow gotten into the old mine workings, I started toward the blocked tunnel, but my flashlight began to flicker. The beam got dimmer and dimmer, even though I'd put in fresh batteries that morning, and the air was getting so cold I could barely feel my fingers. That's when I saw her. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, sitting on a rock ledge near the cave wall. She was wearing a long dress and button-up shoes, like something from an old photograph. Her hair was in braids tied with ribbons. She looked perfectly normal except for one thing. She was glowing with a soft, blue-white light. "Hello, Miss Eleanor," she said in that same sweet voice. "My name is Sarah. We've been waiting such a long time for new friends to come play with us." I tried to speak, but my throat felt frozen. The little girl tilted her head and smiled, and that's when I noticed her eyes. They were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye, like holes cut in a pale mask. "The others are with us now," Sarah continued. "The children from the camping trip. They're so happy to be with us. We get lonely down here in the dark." I forced myself to take a step back toward the tunnel entrance. "Sarah, where are the missing children? I need to take them back to their families." The little girl's smile never changed. "Oh, they can't go back, Miss Eleanor. Once you come to play with us, you stay forever. That's the rule. We learned that in 1890. My radio started making noise, but it wasn't static. It was children laughing and singing that same strange song I'd heard before. The sound seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing off the cave walls. "Don't be afraid," Sarah said, standing up from her rock. As she moved, I could see through her, like she was made of mist and moonlight. "You have little girls of your own, don't you?" Twins? We know all about them. We've seen them in your dreams. That's when I knew I had to get out of there. Fast. I turned and scrambled back through the tunnel, my knees scraping against the stone. Behind me, I could hear Sarah calling out in that sweet voice. Tell your daughters we're waiting for them, Miss Eleanor. Tell them we have games to play and songs to sing. Tell them we'll be their friends forever and ever. When I burst out of the cave into the foggy daylight, I was shaking all over. I grabbed my radio and tried to call for backup, but all I got was that children's laughter. My hands were so cold I could barely work the controls. Billy Jenkins found me 20 minutes later, sitting on a rock and staring at the cave entrance. Eleanor, you look like you've seen a ghost. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Billy, we need to search the old mine workings. I think the kids might have gotten into the sealed areas somehow. Billy frowned. That's impossible. Those tunnels were filled in decades ago. And besides, he paused and looked around at the unnatural fog. Don't you think it's strange how quiet it is out here? No birds, no insects. Even the wind has stopped. He was right. The forest was completely silent, like everything living had run away and left us alone with whatever was hiding in those caves. That's when we heard the singing again. 12 young voices, coming from deep underground, singing a song about going down, down, down into the dark where the coal used to be. Billy's face went white. Eleanor, he whispered, one of those voices. It sounds like my boy. My boy who died in a car crash 2 years ago. Billy and I spent the next 4 hours searching every cave and crevice in the area. We found more handprints, more of those carved pictures on the walls. And in one cave, we discovered something that made my blood run cold. Modern children's backpacks, arranged in a perfect circle around what looked like an old mining lantern. But the lantern was glowing without any fuel, casting that same blue-white light I'd seen around the ghost girl. This doesn't make sense, Billy kept saying. He was a practical man, good with facts and evidence. Finding his dead son's voice in an underground cave was breaking something in his mind. Tommy's been dead 2 years. I was at his funeral. I saw them lower the coffin. I know, I said, though I was starting to doubt everything I thought I knew about the world. We called in the state police and started a full search operation. By evening, we had 30 volunteers combing the area with dogs and lights. But the dogs wouldn't go near the caves. They'd get close to the openings, start whining, and back away with their tails between their legs. Even the horses the mounted police brought got nervous and skittish when they came near the limestone cliffs. As the sun went down, the fog got even thicker. Our flashlight beams couldn't penetrate more than a few feet, and the air got so cold we could see our breath even though it was still October. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since morning, and weather reports said it should have been a normal autumn day. That's when we found the first missing child. Little Amy Peterson, 7 years old, was sitting on a rock outcrop about 50 feet up the cliff face. She was perfectly calm, wearing the same clothes she'd had on when she disappeared, but her skin was pale as moonlight and her lips were blue with cold. Amy, I called up to her. Stay right there, honey. We're coming to get you. She looked down at us with a strange, dreamy expression. I can't come down, Miss Eleanor. I have to wait for the others. We're going to play a game. I got my climbing gear and started up the rock face. It was a routine climb, something I'd done hundreds of times before. But as I got closer to Amy, the air got colder and colder. By the time I was within 10 feet of her, I was shivering so hard I could barely hold on to the rope. Amy, your mom and dad are very worried about you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm and normal. Let's get you down from here and back to them. Amy tilted her head, just like the ghost girl Sarah had done. Mama and Daddy can't see me anymore, she said in a voice that didn't sound quite right. But my new friends can. They've been teaching me songs. That's when she opened her mouth and began to sing. The same old mining song I'd heard before, but now I could understand the words. Asterisk, down, 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 to the deep place, where the coal and the children sleep. Down, down, down in the cold place, where the promises we keep. Asterisk. As she sang, her eyes began to change. The brown color drained out of them until they were completely black, just like Sarah's. And I realized with horror that I could see through her, see the rock face behind her small body. Amy, stop singing, I said, reaching out for her. Take my hand, let me help you. But when my fingers touched her arm, it was like grabbing a piece of ice. Cold shot through my whole body, so intense it felt like burning. And in that moment, I saw something terrible. I saw the mine disaster of 1890. Like I was there watching it happen. Families trapped underground, children crying for their parents in the dark. And I saw something else. Something that had been waiting in the deepest part of the mine long before humans ever came to dig coal. Something hungry and old and patient. Amy smiled at me with her black eyes. The others are already in the deep place, Miss Eleanor. All 12 of them. They're learning the songs and playing the games. Soon it will be midnight, and we can all be together forever. I yanked my hand back and nearly lost my grip on the rope. When I looked up again, Amy was gone. Just vanished, like she'd never been there at all. But I could still hear her singing, echoing from somewhere deep inside the mountain. I rappelled down as fast as I could, my hands shaking on the ropes. Billy was waiting at the bottom, and his face was white as paper. "Eleanor," he said in a voice I barely recognized. "I've been hearing voices in the radio, children's voices. And one of them is asking for you, by name, a little girl who says she knows your daughters." I grabbed the radio from him. Through the static, I could hear them. 12 young voices singing together, and weaving through their song was that sweet voice I recognized. "Miss Eleanor," Sarah's voice came through the speaker. "Your little girls are so pretty. We've been watching them in town, watching them walk to school and play in their yard. They look lonely without their mama. We could be their friends. We could be their friends forever if you bring them to the deep place." I switched off the radio, but the voices kept coming. They were all around us now, echoing from every cave opening, calling out from the fog. The missing children and the ghost children, singing together in harmony. Billy grabbed my arm. "We need to get out of here. This isn't a rescue operation anymore. This is something else entirely." But I couldn't leave. Not with 12 children lost somewhere in those caves, not with that thing, whatever it was, talking about my daughters. My twins, safe in town with their father, didn't even know their mother was fighting for their lives in a dark place under the mountains. "Billy, I need you to go back to town," I said. "Right now. Find my ex-husband and make sure he doesn't let the girls out of his sight. Lock the doors, close the windows, and don't let anyone in, no matter what." "What about you?" I looked up at the cliff face where Amy had been, where she might still be, somewhere in the dark tunnels behind the rock. "I'm going into the mine. The real mine, the deep part that was supposed to be sealed forever. That's where they are, all of them." Billy stared at me. "Eleanor, that's suicide. Even if you could find a way in, we don't know what's down there." But I did know. I'd seen it when I touched Amy's ice-cold arm. Something ancient and hungry that fed on children's life force. Something that had been sleeping in the deep places until the miners woke it up in 1890. And every 23 years, when the barrier between the living world and the dead world got thin, it reached out to collect more children. 23 years. 1,890. 1,913. 1,936. 1,959. And now 1,963. It was almost midnight, and somewhere in the darkness beneath my feet, 12 living children were running out of time. I found the entrance to the old mine just as my grandmother had described it in her Cherokee stories, hidden behind a curtain of dead vines, carved into the hillside like a mouth full of broken teeth. The wooden supports were rotted and crumbling, but the tunnel beyond was clear. My flashlight was almost dead, so I grabbed a kerosene lantern from my emergency kit. The flame flickered and danced as I made my way down the sloping tunnel, and strange shadows jumped on the walls around me. The air got colder with every step, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. But I could also hear something else. Children's voices, singing and laughing, echoing up from the deepest parts of the mine. The tunnel branched and twisted, leading me deeper into the mountain than any mine should go. I passed old wooden carts rusted to pieces, pickaxes and shovels scattered on the ground like toys abandoned by giant children. And on the walls, more of those carved pictures. Children holding hands, children floating in the air, children with black eyes and pale faces. After what felt like hours, the tunnel opened up into a huge underground chamber. My lantern light couldn't reach the far walls, but I could see that the floor was covered with mining equipment, broken timbers, and scattered bones. Human bones, small ones, that gleamed white in the flickering light. And in the center of it all, arranged in a perfect circle, were the 12 missing children. They were sitting cross-legged on the stone floor, holding hands and singing that mining song. Their eyes were all black now, and their skin had taken on that same blue-white glow I'd seen on the ghost children. But they were still alive. I could see their chests rising and falling with each breath, even though their breath came out as clouds of frost. Standing around the outside of the circle were the ghost children from 1,890. 23 pale figures, in old-fashioned clothes, transparent as moonlight but solid enough to cast shadows. At the center of both circles stood a man in mining clothes, tall and thin with eyes like holes in the darkness. "Welcome, Miss Eleanor," the ghost miner said in a voice like wind through empty tunnels. "You're just in time for the exchange." I raised my lantern higher and stepped into the chamber. "Let them go. They don't belong here." The ghost miner smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "Oh, but they do belong here now. They've sung our songs and learned our games. At midnight, when the barrier is thinnest, they'll join us forever. And in their place, my children will walk in the sunlight again." I looked around the circle and saw that each living child was paired with a ghost child of the same size and age. As I watched, the ghost children began to look more solid, while the living children became more transparent. "You can't take them," I said, but my voice sounded small and weak in the vast chamber. "I can take anyone who comes to the deep place," the ghost miner replied. "That's the law of this place, the law that's been here since long before your people dug their holes in my mountain. But I'm not unreasonable, Miss Eleanor. I'll make you a deal." He gestured toward the back of the chamber, and my heart nearly stopped. There, sitting on a pile of mining equipment, were my daughters. My twin girls, Emma and Lucy, 7 years old, with their blonde hair and their mother's blue eyes. But their eyes were turning black, and they were singing along with the other children. "How?" I whispered. "Dreams and longing?" the ghost miner said. "You've been apart from them so long, missing them so much, that longing called to them across the miles. They got up from their beds tonight and walked here in their sleep, drawn by your love and your fear." I started toward my daughters, but the ghost children moved to block my way. They were solid now, solid enough to stop me. "Here's my offer," the ghost miner continued. "Choose 12 children to stay and 12 children to go. You can save some of them, your own daughters, perhaps. But you must choose quickly. Midnight comes whether you decide or not." I looked at the circle of children, the missing ones from Louisville and my own precious girls. They were all looking at me with those black, empty eyes, waiting to see what I would choose. But I remembered something my grandmother had taught me long ago. A Cherokee protection song, words in the old language that were supposed to drive away evil spirits. She'd made me memorize it when I was little, though I'd never believed it would work. I set down my lantern and pulled out my climbing gear. The carabiners and pitons were made of iron, and iron was supposed to hurt spirits. At least, that's what the old stories said. I began to sing my grandmother's song, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger with each word. The ghost children hissed and stepped back from me, and the ghost miner's face twisted with rage. "Iron and ancient words won't save them all," he snarled. "Choose, or I choose for you." But I kept singing, and I started arranging my iron climbing gear in a circle around the living children. The metal seemed to glow in the darkness, and wherever I placed a piton or carabiner, the ghost children couldn't cross. The clock in the town church tower began to chime midnight, the sound somehow carrying all the way down into the deep place. With each chime, the ghost children became more solid and the living children more transparent. But my iron circle was holding them apart. "Choose," the ghost miner screamed. "I choose all of them," I said, completing the circle and continuing my grandmother's song. The 12th chime rang out, and something broke in the air around us. The ghost children shrieked and began to fade, while the living children gasped and their eyes returned to normal. But the ghost miner wasn't finished. He lunged at me with hands like ice and shadow, but when he touched the iron chain around my neck, my grandmother's old necklace that I'd never taken off, he screamed and burst into mist. The chamber began to shake and rumble. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and I knew the whole mine was about to collapse. "Run!" I shouted to the children. "Follow me, and run!" We raced through the tunnels as the mountain came down around us, my iron gear lighting the way like fallen stars. Behind us, I could hear the ghost children calling, but their voices were growing fainter and more distant. We made it out just as the main shaft collapsed, sealing the deep place forever. Or so I hoped. That was 40 years ago, but I remember every detail like it happened yesterday. All 12 children were returned to their families, though they never remembered anything about being in the caves. The doctor said it was trauma, and maybe that was better than the truth. My own daughters came home with me that night, and my ex-husband never questioned why they'd been sleepwalking. They had nightmares for months afterward, dreams about singing in dark places. But eventually those faded too. I left the Park Service the next year. Couldn't explain to my supervisors why I'd sealed up half the cave system with explosives, or why I insisted on posting warnings about the old mine areas. They thought I'd suffered some kind of breakdown. Maybe I had. I became a spiritual advisor for the Cherokee tribe, learning the old songs and stories my grandmother had tried to teach me. I spent years studying the ancient protections, the ways to keep hungry spirits at bay. Because the thing in the deep place wasn't really gone, it was just sleeping again, waiting for the barriers to thin. 1,986 came and went without incident, probably because I'd collapsed most of the tunnels. But in 2009, 2 children went missing near the Red River Gorge. They were found 3 days later, sitting by the sealed mine entrance, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. And now it's 2025, and I'm an old woman with white hair and shaking hands. But I still go back to those hills every October, carrying my grandmother's iron jewelry and singing the protection songs. Because every 23 years, something stirs in the deep places under the mountains. Last week, I got a call from the current park ranger. Children's voices have been heard, singing near the Gray's Arch Trail. Hikers are reporting cold spots and strange fogs. A family camping overnight found their 8-year-old daughter missing from her tent in the morning, only to discover her sitting on a rock ledge 50 feet up a cliff face, singing a song she'd never heard before. They found her just after sunrise, and her eyes were still brown, so they got to her in time. But I know what's coming. The barriers are thin again, and the hungry thing in the darkness is reaching out for more children. It learns from its failures, gets stronger with each cycle. I'm too old now to crawl through caves and climb rock faces, but I've been training others, teaching them the old songs and the power of iron, because someone has to stand guard over the deep places. Someone has to remember what waits in the darkness under the mountains. If you're planning to hike the Daniel Boone backcountry with children, you need to remember this story. Watch for unnatural fogs, listen for children singing in empty places, and never let your little ones wander away from camp at night. And if you find yourself in a place where the air turns cold and your flashlight beam bends wrong, where you can hear children's voices calling from inside solid rock, turn around and walk away. Some places are hungry, and they never forget. My name is Eleanor Fairmont, and I've spent my whole life saving people from the mountains. But there are some things in these hills that can't be rescued, only contained. The deep place is still down there, waiting for midnight to come again. Don't let it be your children who answer when it calls. My name is Marcus Holloway, and I've been walking these mountains for 18 years. Seen black bears that could tear a man in half, mountain lions that hunt in the dark, and more meth labs hidden in caves than I care to count. None of that prepared me for what hunts in the shadow of Cataract Falls. It was late November 1978 when it all started. The other rangers had pulled out early because of storm warnings, but someone had to do the winter patrol. That someone was always me. 44 years old, divorced, and my son Jake wouldn't even take my calls anymore. The mountains were all I had left. I remember the morning I found the first body. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and snow was starting to fall through the thick canopy of old trees. Some of these oaks and maples had been growing here for 300 years, long before any white man set foot in Cherokee territory. My grandfather used to tell stories about this place, back when he still talked about his Cherokee blood, before the family decided we were just mountain people and nothing else. The hiker was a college kid from Knoxville. At least, I thought it was a college kid until I got closer. The body lay twisted next to the stream, arms spread wide like he'd been reaching for help that never came. But it was what was missing that made my hands shake as I reached for my radio. Someone had cut him open. Clean, precise cuts like a surgeon might make. And his liver was gone, just gone, cut out and taken like someone was collecting trophies. I'd seen plenty of death in Vietnam, knew what bullets did to a man, what shrapnel could tear apart. But this was different. This was careful, personal. Base? This is Ranger Holloway, I said into the radio, trying to keep my voice steady. I've got a body at Cataract Falls, male, early 20s. This wasn't an animal attack. Static crackled back at me. The mountains played hell with radio signals, especially when storms were moving in. I was on my own out here, 20 miles from the nearest road, with something that killed like it had all the time in the world. I'd learned to track in the Army, learned it well enough to survive 3 tours. But when I circled that body, I found something that made no sense. No footprints, no drag marks, no broken branches or disturbed leaves. It was like the kid had been killed somewhere else and just appeared by the stream. The smell hit me then. Old earth and copper, like pennies left in the rain. And underneath that, something else. Something that made the hair on my neck stand up. I'd been drinking too much since Sarah left. Hell, I'd been drinking too much since I got back from the war. But I was stone sober that morning, and I knew what I was seeing. This wasn't random. This wasn't some crazy person wandering the mountains. This was something else entirely. As I waited for backup that might not come before dark, I noticed the quiet. In 18 years of walking these trails, I'd never heard quiet like this. No birds, no squirrels chattering in the trees, no insects buzzing, just the sound of the stream running over rocks, and even that seemed muffled and wrong. The trees themselves felt like they were watching, waiting. I should have left then, should have called in sick and let someone else deal with whatever was happening at Cataract Falls, but I'd never run from anything in my life, and I wasn't about to start. Besides, where would I go? These mountains were home, they were all I knew. By the time I hiked back to my truck that evening, snow was falling harder. The forecast said the storm would last 3 days, maybe 4. No way backup was getting in before then. Just me and 20 square miles of wilderness, and something that killed with surgical precision. That night, alone in my cabin, I cleaned my service weapon and tried not to think about the smell of old earth and copper. Tried not to remember how the trees had seemed to lean in closer as the day went on. But I kept coming back to what my grandfather had said, back when I was just a boy and he still told the old stories. He'd warned me about places like Cataract Falls, sacred places where the Cherokee used to go for vision quests, places where the spirits still lived, still watched, still remembered every wrong that had been done to them. I'd laughed at those stories then, figured they were just old superstitions from a man who'd lived too long in the mountains. I wasn't laughing anymore. The second body turned up 2 days later. I found her hanging upside down from a tree branch, 15 feet off the ground, Martha Chen, according to the ID in her backpack. A nature photographer from Atlanta who'd come up to shoot the fall colors, only there wasn't much left to shoot anymore. The leaves had all fallen early this year, like the trees themselves were getting ready for something bad. Same precise cuts, same missing liver, same impossible lack of evidence. But this time, I found something else. Scratches in the bark of the big oak tree where Martha hung. Deep gouges that spiraled up the trunk, 20 feet high. Whatever made them had fingers or claws that could cut through oak like it was soft cheese. I stood there in the gray morning light, neck craned back, trying to figure out how anything could climb straight up that tree. The bark was smooth, no handholds, no rope marks, no scratches from climbing gear. The gouges were fresh, wood shavings still littered the ground below. "Jesus," I whispered, and my breath came out in a cloud of vapor. It was getting colder, much colder than it should be for November. That's when I heard it. Singing, old words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood in my bones. A woman's voice, high and sweet, drifting through the trees from somewhere deeper in the forest. Cherokee words, though I couldn't say how I knew that. The song stopped as soon as I started moving toward it. I spent the rest of the morning following game trails deeper into the backcountry, looking for any sign of who might be out here. The singing had sounded close, but in these mountains, sound could bounce around for miles before reaching your ears. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Stone markers. Dozens of them, arranged in perfect circles around the biggest oak trees. Flat river rocks stacked in careful piles, each one carved with symbols that looked older than the mountains themselves. Cherokee warning signs, though I couldn't read them, but they were fresh. The moss hadn't even started to grow on them yet. Someone was out here. Someone who knew the old ways, who understood what these mountains had been before the white man came. Someone who was marking territory, or something. I made camp that night in a clearing about 3 miles from where I'd found Martha Chen. Standard procedure said I should hike out, wait for backup, approach this like a normal criminal investigation. But nothing about this felt normal. And the storm was getting worse. Ice was forming on my water bottle, and the wind was picking up, making the trees creak and groan like old bones. I'd just gotten my camp stove lit when I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps circling my camp. Too heavy to be a person, too measured to be an animal. I grabbed my flashlight and service weapon, clicking off the safety. "Hello," I called out. "This is a park ranger. Show yourself." The footsteps stopped. In the sudden quiet, I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, showing me nothing but tree trunks and falling snow. Then the singing started again, closer this time, much closer. The Cherokee words seemed to come from all around me at once, like the forest itself was singing. And underneath the melody, I heard something else, something that sounded like stone scraping against stone. I spun in a slow circle, keeping my gun raised, trying to find the source of the sound. That's when I saw her. An old Cherokee woman stood just at the edge of my light, maybe 50 feet away. She wore traditional dress, buckskin and beads, and her long gray hair hung loose around her shoulders. She was singing softly, the same melody I'd heard before. "Ma'am," I called out, lowering my weapon slightly. "You shouldn't be out here. There's been some trouble. It's not safe." She stopped singing and looked directly at me. Even from that distance, I could see her eyes, black as coal, black as the deepest cave. When she smiled, her teeth looked wrong. Too sharp, too many. "Safe," she said, and her voice carried clear as a bell across the clearing. "This is sacred ground, Ranger. My ground. You are the one who should not be here. Ma'am, I need you to." But when I blinked, she was gone. Just gone, like she'd never been there at all. I stayed awake all night, feeding wood to my fire, jumping at every sound. When morning came, I found tracks in the snow around my camp. But they weren't footprints. They were drag marks, like something heavy had been pulled in circles around my tent. And at the center of each circle, driven deep into the frozen ground, were the same stone-cutting marks I'd found on the oak tree. Only these were shaped like fingers. Human fingers. Very long human fingers. By the time I found the third body, I knew I was dealing with something that wasn't human. Dr. Patricia Wells had driven up from Knoxville the day before the storm hit, some kind of FBI consultant specializing in ritual murders. Smart woman, probably too smart for her own good. She'd read about the first 2 killings and thought she could help figure out the pattern. I found her Toyota stuck in the snow about 2 miles down the mountain road, doors hanging open like she'd left in a hurry. Her camping gear was scattered around the car, and there were those same stone-cutting marks all over the metal. Deep gouges that went right through the steel. Her body was a 1/4 mile away, pinned to a tree with what looked like a wooden spear. But when I got closer, I saw it wasn't wood at all. It was stone, a finger of stone, sharp as any knife, driven through her chest and into the oak behind her, and carved into the tree above her head, fresh enough that sap was still bleeding from the cuts, was a Cherokee symbol I actually recognized. My grandfather had drawn it for me once, back when I was 8 years old and full of questions about his stories. It meant justice. That's when I started to understand. This wasn't random. Whoever was doing this had a reason. A plan. I was still staring at that symbol when I heard the voice behind me. "She came looking for monsters," the old woman said. "I simply gave her what she wanted." I spun around, gun already in my hand. But she was standing way too close. Close enough that I could smell her. Old earth and copper, just like at the crime scenes. Just like the mountains themselves. Up close, I could see she wasn't really human. Her skin had a gray tint to it, like river stone. Her fingers were too long, especially the right index finger, which came to a point sharp enough to cut glass. And her eyes held the kind of age you only see in rocks and trees. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. She smiled that too sharp smile. The Cherokee call me Utlunta, Spearfinger. I am the one who takes the livers of the guilty. Guilty of what? Your people came to these mountains in 1838, she said, taking a step closer. I wanted to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. They drove my children from their homes, forced them to walk a trail of tears and death. Many died. Children, elders, pregnant women. They died because your people decided our land belonged to them. That was over 100 years ago. These people weren't. Their ancestors were. Her voice got harder, colder. I can smell the guilt in their blood. The debt passed down from father to son, mother to daughter, and now the debt comes due. She raised that impossibly sharp finger and pointed it at my chest. Your great-great-grandfather, Marcus Holloway, he wore the uniform of the Georgia Guard. He was there when they burned our sacred places. There when they drove us from our homes. I can smell his blood in you. My mouth went dry. I'd never heard that name before. Never knew anything about my family beyond my grandfather's stories. But somehow, looking into those ancient black eyes, I believed her. I had nothing to do with that, I said. Didn't you? She tilted her head like a bird studying a bug. You work for the same government. You patrol the land they stole. You keep others from learning the truth about what happened here. I protect people. I protect these mountains. You protect thieves and murderers. She took another step closer. And now I could see that her skin wasn't just gray, it was stone. Actual stone, moving like flesh. But I offer you a choice, Marcus Holloway. Help me finish what I started, or join your ancestors in feeding the mountain. That's when my training finally kicked in. I raised my gun and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets hit her chest and bounced off like I was shooting at a boulder. She didn't even flinch, just smiled wider, showing me those shark teeth. Iron and lead cannot harm me, Ranger. I am the mountain's daughter, older than your Jesus, older than your laws. I am justice itself. She lunged forward, and that stone finger swept past my head so close I felt the air split. I threw myself sideways, rolling through the snow, and came up running. Behind me, I heard laughter, like rocks tumbling down a cliff face. I ran for 3 miles without stopping, crashing through underbrush, sliding down icy slopes, not caring about the noise I made. When I finally stopped to catch my breath, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. I was alone in 20 square miles of wilderness with something that could cut through steel and stone, something that wanted me dead because of crimes my ancestors committed. And the worst part? I was starting to think she might be right about those crimes. That night, huddled in a cave with a fire I was afraid to build too big, I thought about my grandfather, about the stories he'd told before the family made him stop. Stories about Cherokee spirits and sacred places. Stories about justice that came slow but sure, like water wearing down stone. Stories I'd always thought were just fairy tales. The singing started again around midnight, closer than before, and this time other voices joined in. Men's voices, children's voices, all singing the same mournful Cherokee melody, all singing from the darkness just beyond my fire's light. I knew then that Dr. Wells, Martha Chen, and that college kid were just the beginning. Spearfinger was calling up an army, and they were coming for everyone whose blood carried the old guilt, including me. The attack came at dawn. I woke to the sound of stone scraping against stone, and when I looked out of my cave, I saw them. Dozens of figures moving through the trees. Cherokee warriors in traditional dress, women in buckskin, children with faces like carved wood, all of them gray as river stone, all of them walking toward my hiding place with that same slow, deliberate pace. And leading them was Spearfinger herself, 9 feet tall now, her stone skin gleaming in the pale morning light, that terrible finger pointing straight at my cave like an arrow aimed at my heart. Come out, Marcus Holloway, her voice echoed off the rocks. Face the judgment of those your family wronged. I had 6 bullets left in my gun, a hunting knife and a lighter, against an army of stone spirits led by something older than the mountains themselves. The math wasn't good, but as I watched them approach, something my grandfather had said came back to me. Something about Cherokee magic, about how the spirits could be turned away if you knew the right words, the right rituals. The old blood remembers, he'd whispered to me once, when I was 12 and asking too many questions. Even when the mind forgets, the blood remembers. I thought about the dreams I'd been having since the killings started. Dreams of Cherokee faces, Cherokee words, dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. I want to know the truth, I shouted out of the cave. About my family, about what they did. The stone army stopped moving. Spearfinger tilted her head, considering. You want truth? She asked. Then come, let me show you. Against every instinct I had, I walked out of that cave. The moment I stepped into the clearing, Spearfinger reached out with that stone finger and touched my forehead. The world exploded. Suddenly, I was standing in the same forest, but it was 1,838. The trees were smaller, the streams ran clearer, and Cherokee families lived in cabins scattered through the valleys. I could see children playing, women tending gardens, men returning from hunting trips. Then the soldiers came. I watched my great-great-grandfather, wearing the blue uniform of the Georgia Guard, as he kicked in doors and dragged families from their homes. I saw him burn sacred objects, destroy food stores, separate children from their parents. I felt his satisfaction as he counted the Cherokee homes burning in the valley below. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching him find the sacred cave where Cherokee medicine people kept their most holy objects. Watching him smash stone tablets covered with ancient writings. Watching him desecrate burial sites where Cherokee ancestors had rested for thousands of years. And watching him smile while he did it. Now you know, Spearfinger said, pulling her finger away from my forehead. I was back in the present, back in the snow and the cold. Your blood carries this guilt. Your family built their lives on Cherokee bones. I wanted to deny it. Wanted to say that wasn't me, that I wasn't responsible for what my ancestors did. But looking into those ancient eyes, I saw something that changed everything. Pain, loss, the kind of grief that lasts for generations. What do you want from me? I asked. Justice, she said simply. Your life for the lives your family took, your blood to water the ground they poisoned. And if I refuse? She gestured to the stone army surrounding us. Then I will take every person in these mountains whose blood carries guilt. Every descendant of every soldier, every official, every settler who participated in the theft. I will not stop until the debt is paid in full. I thought about all the innocent people who would die. Campers, hikers, families who came to the mountains for vacation, people who had no idea what their ancestors might have done. There has to be another way, I said. There is. A new voice spoke from the edge of the clearing. An old Cherokee man stepped out from behind a tree, but unlike the others, his skin was flesh, not stone. He was alive, or at least more alive than the rest. Grandfather, I whispered, though I'd never seen this man before in my life. He smiled. Your great-grandmother was my daughter, Marcus. Cherokee blood flows in your veins, even though your family tried to deny it. That blood gives you choices. Spearfinger hissed like steam escaping from hot stone. He is guilty as Gaia. His family's crimes can be answered by Cherokee law, the old man said firmly. Our law, not your hunger for revenge. The boy can make amends. He can become what his ancestor should have been, a protector of sacred places instead of a destroyer. What does that mean? I asked. Accept your Cherokee heritage, as Gaia said. Learn the old ways. Protect these mountains not just as a park ranger, but as a guardian of sacred ground. Teach others to respect what was lost. Make sure the stories are told, so this never happens again. Spearfinger's stone finger twitched toward my throat. And if he fails? If he breaks his promise? Then you can take him, as Gaia said. But only him. Leave the others alone. I looked around at the stone army, at Spearfinger's terrible face, at the old Cherokee man who claimed to be my great-great-grandfather. In the distance, I could see storm clouds building again. More snow coming, and with it, the possibility of more innocent people getting caught in this ancient war. I accept, I said. Spearfinger's eyes narrowed to black slits. You would bind yourself to our ways? Become Cherokee in truth, not just blood? Yes. You would carry the responsibility for all who enter these sacred places? Ensure they show proper respect? Yes. And you understand that if you break this oath, I will return for you? I will take not just your life, but your death will be unpleasant? I swallowed hard. I understand. She studied me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. So be it. She touched my forehead again with that stone finger, but gently this time. Fire raced through my veins, and suddenly I could understand the Cherokee words the spirits were singing. Could feel the pain of the mountain itself, the old wounds that had never healed. And I could feel something else. Power. Connection to something larger than myself, older than the government I worked for. Deeper than any law written by men. Guard them well, Cherokee son, Spearfinger said, for I will be watching. The stone army turned and walked back into the forest, fading into the trees like they'd never been there at all. In moments, I was alone in the clearing with Asgaya. Will she keep her word? I asked. The old man smiled. Spearfinger always keeps her word. The question is whether you'll keep yours. That was 3 months ago. The official report blamed the deaths on a combination of bear attacks and cult activity. 7 tourists dead, no suspects in custody, case closed due to lack of evidence. The FBI consultant's death was ruled accidental poor weather conditions, inadequate preparation for mountain travel. Nobody asked too many questions. Nobody wanted to dig deeper into something that didn't make sense. But I know the truth. And now, so do others. The Cherokee Tribal Council sent representatives to meet with me 2 weeks after the storm cleared. They listened to my story without surprise, like they'd been expecting this call for years. Maybe they had been. They taught me the proper ceremonies for blessing the trails. Showed me how to recognize the old boundary markers, the places where visitors should tread lightly or not at all. Gave me Cherokee words to speak when the mountain spirits grow restless. And they gave me a new name, Kanegwati, protector of the sacred. My old life is mostly gone now. Sarah didn't come back, and I didn't expect her to. Jake called once, asking if I was all right after he read about the tourist deaths. It was the first time we'd talked in 2 years. Small steps. I don't drink anymore, don't have nightmares about Vietnam. Those old ghosts seem pale and distant compared to what I've seen in these mountains, compared to what I've become. The Park Service doesn't know about the changes I've made to the trail system. The subtle redirections that guide hikers away from the most sacred sites. The new warning signs I've posted in Cherokee and English. The agreements I've made with local Cherokee groups to provide cultural education for visitors. They just know that we haven't had any more bear attacks or unexplained deaths. That's enough for them. But sometimes, on the quiet nights when I'm doing my rounds, I hear her singing in the distance. Spearfinger, watching from the deep places where the oldest trees grow, waiting to see if I'll keep my promise. And sometimes I see other things moving in the darkness between the trees, spirits that were never human, things that remember when this land was wilder, when it belonged to people who understood its power. I'm not the only one with Cherokee blood working in these mountains. Found 3 other rangers and 2 maintenance workers with similar family histories. All of them having dreams now. All of them learning to listen when the mountains speak. Because it's spreading. Whatever Spearfinger awakened here, it's calling to others of her kind across Appalachia. Park rangers in Virginia reporting strange disappearances. Hikers in West Virginia telling stories about stone women in the forest. Missing persons cases in North Carolina that don't add up. The old debts are coming due all across the mountains, and there aren't enough protectors to hold them back. I got a call last week from a ranger in Georgia, young woman named Sarah Blackbird, Cherokee herself, asking about unusual animal behavior in her park. Asking about the dreams she's been having, about the songs she hears when she's alone on the trails. I'm driving down there next month to meet with her, to share what I've learned, to help her understand what her blood makes her responsible for. Because that's what guardians do. We teach the next generation. We pass on the old knowledge before it's too late. My grandfather was right about these mountains. They remember everything. Every kindness and every cruelty. Every promise kept and every oath broken. And now, finally, they have voices again. Cherokee voices. If you ever come to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, if you ever find yourself walking the trails around Cataract Falls, remember what I've told you. Show respect. Stay on the marked paths. Don't disturb the stone circles or take anything that doesn't belong to you. And if you hear singing in the forest, singing in a language you don't recognize but somehow understand in your bones, don't go looking for the source. Just remember that these mountains have guardians now, and some debts take generations to pay. My name is Marcus Holloway, and I protect sacred ground. The old blood remembers, even when the mind forgets, and Spearfinger is always listening. My name is Samuel Bradshaw, and I've been a ranger in Jefferson National Forest for 21 years now. Before that, I spent 15 years underground, digging coal out of these same mountains. People always ask why I made the switch. Truth is, I got tired of wondering if each shift would be my last. It was August 1985, and we were in the middle of the worst heat wave I could remember. The drought had been going on for 3 months, and the water table was so low that old mine shafts I hadn't seen in decades were starting to show their faces again. Orange streams trickled down the mountainsides where acid from the old mines was finally seeing daylight. I was up on Clinch Mountain that morning, checking on a new strip mining operation that had started up near some abandoned shafts. The company said they had all the permits, but I'd heard that story before. My job was to make sure they weren't going to cause any fires or cave-ins that might spread to the national forest. The site foreman, a big guy named Murphy, met me at the gate. "Nothing to worry about here, Ranger," he said, mopping sweat from his forehead. "We know what we're doing." I'd heard that before too. Murphy reminded me of the bosses from my mining days, more worried about schedules than safety. The kind of man who'd send you into a tunnel even when the gas detectors were acting up. As I walked around the site, something felt off. The machines were all parked in perfect rows, like someone had arranged them during the night. That wasn't normal for a work site. Usually, operators just left their equipment wherever they finished for the day. "Your boys always keep things this neat?" I asked Murphy. He looked around, frowning. "That's strange. We left everything scattered yesterday when we quit. Had some equipment problems." I pulled out my notepad. "What kind of problems?" "Well, Johnson's bulldozer just stopped working. Engine was fine, but somehow all the tracks came loose. Strangest thing, the bolts were still there, just sitting in a neat pile next to the machine." A cold feeling crept up my spine, even in the 90-degree heat. I'd worked with heavy machinery my whole life. Tracks don't just come loose, especially not with the bolts stacked up like someone had used proper tools. "Any of your men work on it after hours?" Murphy shook his head. "Site's locked up tight. Besides, it would take hours to remove all those bolts, and you'd need the right equipment." I walked over to look at the bulldozer. The tracks were back on now, but I could see fresh tool marks on the bolts. Only problem was, these marks looked like they came from tools I'd never seen before. The scratches were too precise, too uniform. "Mind if I look around some more?" I asked. "Go ahead, we got nothing to hide." That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, but as I walked toward the old mine entrances, it got stronger. Coal dust and something else, something that reminded me of the deep mines where the air never moved right. The abandoned shafts were supposed to be sealed, but I could see that some of the barriers had shifted, not broken exactly, but moved just enough to let air flow through. And that air smelled like the mines from my working days, damp earth, old timber, and the metallic taste that meant methane gas. I radioed back to headquarters. "This is Bradshaw. I'm going to need the gas detector equipment up here." "Everything okay, Sam?" I looked around the site again. The workers were starting their shifts, but they kept glancing at the mine entrances like they could feel something watching them. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not. My wife Sarah always said I worried too much, that I saw dangers where none existed. But 15 years underground teaches you to trust your gut. When something feels wrong, it usually is." As I walked back to my truck to get the gas detector, I heard something that made me stop cold. It was faint, but I knew the sound. Metal on stone, rhythmic and steady. Someone was swinging a pickaxe inside the sealed mine. I stood there listening for a full minute, but the sound had stopped. Murphy and his crew were all accounted for, working on the surface. The mine entrance was still blocked off, just like it had been for 30 years. "Must be the heat playing tricks," I muttered, but I didn't believe it. I got my gas detector from the truck and walked over to the nearest mine entrance. The machine started clicking as soon as I got close. Methane levels were way too high for a sealed mine. Gas like that meant there was activity down below, movement stirring up pockets that should have settled decades ago. "Murphy," I called. "You need to move your men back from these entrances. Gas levels are dangerous." "How dangerous?" "One spark, and this whole mountainside could blow." Murphy started shouting orders, and his crew pulled back to a safer distance. But as they moved, I noticed something else. There were footprints in the coal dust around the mine entrance. Fresh ones. Only problem was, they were the wrong kind of footprints. These looked like the heavy work boots we used to wear in the mines back in the 50s. Thick leather with metal studs for grip. Nobody had worn boots like that in 30 years. I followed the prints as far as I could, They led right up to the mine entrance, and then nothing. Like whoever made them had walked straight through solid rock. That evening, I drove into town to check the records at the courthouse. The mines up on Clinch Mountain had been abandoned since 1952, after an explosion killed 73 men. I remembered my grandfather talking about it, said it was the worst mining disaster in county history. The newspaper from back then was still on file. Mine explosion kills 73. The headline read, "Company officials say safety protocols were followed." But there was a smaller article buried on page 3 that caught my attention. Miners' families claim safety warnings ignored. According to that article, the miners had been complaining about gas buildup for weeks before the explosion. They'd asked the company to install better ventilation, but the bosses said it would slow down production. The investigation afterward found that the company had known about the danger but chose to keep working anyway. 73 men dead because someone cared more about money than lives. I drove back up the mountain as the sun was setting. The worksite was empty now, but I wanted to check those gas readings again. Maybe the levels would drop during the night when there was no activity. I was wrong. The gas detector was going crazy before I even got out of the truck. And that sound was back. The rhythmic swing of pickaxes, echoing from deep underground. This time I didn't doubt what I was hearing. I grabbed my flashlight and walked closer to the mine entrance. The sounds were definitely coming from inside, but now there were more of them. Multiple pickaxes, all swinging in rhythm like a mining crew hard at work. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone in there?" The sounds stopped immediately. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was a voice, muffled by tons of rock, but clear enough to understand. "Get out," it said. "Get out before they kill you too." I ran back to my truck and grabbed the radio. "This is Ranger Bradshaw requesting immediate backup at the Clinch Mountain site." "What's your situation, Sam?" "I've got trespassers in a sealed mine. Could be dangerous. We'll have a team up there in an hour." But as I waited for backup, I started thinking about those newspaper articles. 73 miners killed because the company ignored safety warnings. And now, 30 years later, another mining company was working the same area. What if the voices weren't trespassers? What if they were warnings? When the backup team arrived, we searched the area thoroughly. No signs of anyone entering the mines. No broken seals, no disturbance of the barriers. But the gas levels were still dangerously high, and we kept hearing those sounds from underground. Officer Martinez, one of the county deputies, looked spooked. "Maybe we should seal these entrances better," he suggested. "Maybe we should," I agreed. But even as we talked about it, I knew sealing wouldn't help. Whatever was down there had been waiting for 30 years. And with another mining company working the same ground where 73 men had died, I had a feeling it wasn't going to wait much longer. As we prepared to leave, I heard the voice one more time, clearer than before. "They're doing it again, Bradshaw. Just like before. Stop them before it's too late." The voice knew my name, and somehow I knew that voice too. The next morning, I got a call that made my stomach drop. Murphy's excavator had been found dismantled in the middle of the work site. Not damaged, dismantled. Every bolt removed, every hydraulic line disconnected, all the pieces stacked in neat piles. "This is impossible," Murphy said when I arrived. "It would take a team of mechanics 8 hours to take apart an excavator like this, and they'd need a full set of specialized tools." I walked around the machine, looking at the work. It was perfect, professional, like the machine had been taken apart by people who knew exactly what they were doing. "Any security cameras on site?" "Just installed them last week," Murphy said, leading me to the trailer. "Let's see what they caught." We watched the footage from the night before. At 11:47 p.m., the excavator was sitting normal. At 11:48 p.m., it was completely taken apart. 1 minute. The camera never showed anyone working on it. "That's not possible," Murphy whispered. I looked at the timestamp again. 11:47 to 11:48. 60 seconds to dismantle an excavator that should take hours. "Murphy, I need you to shut down operations until we figure out what's happening." "I can't do that. We've got deadlines, contracts." "You've got safety problems," I interrupted. "Big ones." But Murphy wouldn't listen. He was like all the bosses I'd known in the mines. Production first, safety second. So I called the state mining inspector and reported the incident. Inspector Williams arrived that afternoon, a a thin man with tired eyes who'd seen too many industrial accidents. He listened to our story without saying much, then walked around the site taking notes. "Heard you used to work the mines, Bradshaw," he said. 15 years. Then you know how these companies operate. Corners get cut, safety gets ignored, people get hurt. He was right. I'd seen it myself, back when I was younger, and needed the job too much to complain. "What I can't figure out," Williams continued, "is who's got the skills and equipment to do something like this overnight." That's when we heard it. The sound of pickaxes, clear as day, coming from the sealed mine entrance. Williams heard it too. "What the hell is that?" We walked over together. The sounds were louder now, and there were more voices. Men calling out to each other, the way miners do when they're working deep tunnels. Williams pulled out his own gas detector. "Methane levels are through the roof," he said. "This whole area should have been evacuated." I tried to tell Murphy. "Murphy," Williams shouted across the site, "shut it down, right now." But Murphy was nowhere to be seen. His truck was still there, but he wasn't answering when we called. We found him an hour later, sitting in his car with the windows rolled up and the engine off. He was dead. The official cause would be listed as heart attack, but I knew better. His car was filled with coal dust. Fresh coal dust that shouldn't have existed anywhere on the site, and his face looked like he'd been trying to breathe through a mask made of coal. Williams called in the state police, and they treated it like a crime scene. But there was no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. Murphy had just suffocated in a cloud of coal dust that appeared from nowhere. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Murphy's face and about those voices in the mine. So I drove back up the mountain. The work site was empty except for the police tape, but I could hear activity down in the mines. Lots of activity. It sounded like a full crew was working down there. I parked my truck and walked closer. The sounds were coming from multiple mine shafts now, not just one. Pickaxes, shovels, the rumble of mining carts, and voices. Dozens of voices calling back and forth in the darkness. "Hello," I called out. The sounds stopped. "I'm Sam Bradshaw. I used to work these mines." Silence for a long moment. Then one voice answered, clearer than the others. "Samuel? Little Sammy Bradshaw?" My heart nearly stopped. I knew that voice. It was my grandfather, who died in a mine cave-in when I was 12 years old. "Granddad? You shouldn't be here, boy. This place ain't safe for the living." "What's happening? What do you want?" Same thing we always wanted. Justice, safety, someone to listen when we say the mines ain't safe. More voices joined in, dozens of them, calling from different mine shafts. They ignored the gas warnings, sent us down anyway. 73 dead for their profits. And they're doing it again. I understood then. The spirits of the miners killed in 1952 were trying to stop history from repeating itself. They'd seen Murphy's company making the same mistakes, ignoring the same safety warnings, and they weren't going to let it happen again. "What can I do?" I asked. "Stop them," my grandfather's voice said, "before more good men die." The voices faded, but the message was clear. The dead miners weren't the enemy, they were trying to prevent another disaster. The real enemy was the same one it had always been: greed that put profits over people's lives. The next day brought news that changed everything. Williams had been digging into the mining company's records, and what he found made my blood boil. They knew, he told me over the phone. Just like in 1952, they knew about the gas buildup and chose to ignore it. I found internal memos talking about acceptable risk levels and production priorities. How bad is it? Bad enough that if they'd kept working, we would have had another explosion within the week. Could have killed a dozen men, maybe more. I thought about Murphy, sitting in his car filled with coal dust. Maybe the spirits had been trying to save his workers' lives, even if they couldn't save him. That evening, I got a call from my son, Danny. He'd been working for the same mining company, different site, but same bosses. "Dad, something weird is happening at work. Our safety equipment keeps malfunctioning, but every time it breaks, we find a real problem underneath. Gas leaks, unstable ceiling supports, faulty wiring. It's like something's trying to protect us." My heart sank. The company was making the same mistakes at Danny's site too. "Son, I need you to get out of there. Tonight. I can't just quit, Dad. I need this job. You need to be alive more." But Danny wouldn't listen. He was young and needed the money, just like I had been at his age. That night, I made a decision that would change my life forever. I drove up to Clinch Mountain with a plan. I parked at the worksite and walked straight to the mine entrance. "Granddad," I called out, "I need to talk to you." The response came immediately. Not just my grandfather's voice, but dozens of them, all the miners who had died in 1952. "We're listening, Samuel. They're doing the same thing at other sites. My son's working for them. If I help you stop them completely, will you protect him?" A long pause. Then my grandfather spoke. "We protect all miners, boy. Always have. But we need someone on the surface to speak for us. Someone people will believe. What do you need me to do? Come down here, see what really happened to us, then tell the world." The mine entrance, which had been sealed for 30 years, swung open like a door. I knew I should be terrified, but I wasn't. These were miners, like me. They understood the dangers underground, and they wouldn't let harm come to someone trying to help. I grabbed my flashlight and walked into the mine. The tunnel looked exactly like it had in 1952. Old wooden supports, narrow rail tracks, the smell of coal dust and methane. But it felt alive in a way that abandoned mines never do. As I walked deeper, miners' lamps began glowing along the walls. Not electric lights, the old carbide lamps we used to wear on our helmets. And in the glow, I could see them. 73 miners, still wearing their work clothes, still carrying their tools. They looked solid, real, like they'd never died. My grandfather stepped forward. He looked exactly like I remembered him, but his clothes were torn and covered in coal dust. "This is where it happened, Samuel," he said, gesturing to a section where the tunnel ceiling had collapsed. "Gas buildup for 3 weeks. We told them it wasn't safe. They said keep digging anyway." Other miners gathered around, each telling their story. I left a wife and 4 children. 20 years old, never saw my first grandchild. Begged them to fix the ventilation. They said it would cost too much. I understood then why they were angry. They hadn't just died, they'd been murdered by negligence. "We've been waiting," my grandfather said, "waiting for someone who would listen, someone who would make sure it never happens again. I'll expose them," I promised. "I'll make sure everyone knows what they did. And what they're still doing," another miner added. "Your boy's site has the same problems. Gas buildup, faulty equipment, shortcuts on safety." They showed me documents, somehow preserved in the supernatural space of the mine. Internal company memos from 1952 and new ones from 1985. The same language, the same excuses, the same willingness to risk lives for profit. "Take these," my grandfather said. "Show the world." But as I reached for the documents, the mine began to shake. Rock dust rained from the ceiling, and I could hear the groaning of unstable timbers. "What's happening?" "They're trying to seal us in again," one of the miners said. "The company, they know you're here." I looked back toward the entrance and saw lights, flashlights, moving fast down the tunnel. "Company security," my grandfather said grimly. "They don't want these documents to see daylight." The miners formed a protective circle around me. "We'll hold them off," my grandfather said, "but you need to get out another way." There is no other way. There is now. The wall of the mine simply opened. Like a door I'd never seen before. "This tunnel leads to the surface near your son's work site," my grandfather said. "Stop them, Samuel. Stop them once and for all." I emerged from the impossible tunnel just as the sun was coming up, about 2 miles from Danny's mining site. The documents from the dead miners were still clutched in my hands, solid and real. Danny's crew was just starting their morning shift when I arrived. The foreman tried to stop me, but I had the authority of a federal ranger and the determination of a father protecting his son. "Evacuate this site immediately," I ordered. "I have evidence of safety violations that could kill your entire crew." The foreman argued, but when I showed him the gas readings and the internal company documents, his face went pale. Those papers proved that the company had known about dangerous conditions at multiple sites and had chosen to keep working anyway. Within an hour, state inspectors were swarming both sites. By the end of the day, the mining company's operations in 3 counties had been shut down. By the end of the week, 5 company executives were under arrest for criminal negligence. The story made national news. "Miners' Ghost Exposes Corporate Cover-Up," one headline read. Most people thought it was a joke, but the miners knew better. They understood that sometimes the dead have to protect the living. Danny quit the mining company and found work with the Forest Service. Guess it runs in the family, he said. My wife Sarah lived another 2 years before the black lung finally took her. But she lived long enough to see the mining company pay settlements to the families of the 1952 disaster, and to see new safety laws passed that would protect future miners. As for me, I became something I never expected, a miners' rights activist. I travel around the country now, speaking at union meetings and safety conferences. I tell the story of Clinch Mountain and the 73 miners who refused to stay dead while their killers were still alive. People always ask if I really believe the mine was haunted. I tell them it doesn't matter what I believe. What matters is that those miners, living or dead, were right about the dangers. They were right in 1952, and they're still right today. Sometimes, late at night, I'll get a call from a miner somewhere in Appalachia. They'll tell me about equipment that mysteriously breaks down just before cave-ins, or safety warnings that appear overnight on dangerous equipment. They'll ask if I think it's the spirits of dead miners watching over them. I always tell them the same thing. Could be. But whether it's ghosts or guardian angels or just dumb luck, if something's telling you a mine isn't safe, you'd better listen. The old Clinch Mountain site is sealed now, really sealed this time. But sometimes, when I drive past on my ranger rounds, I can still hear the sound of pickaxes echoing from deep underground. Working, always working, keeping watch over the mines and the miners who dig in them. My grandfather taught me a lot during my 15 years underground, but the most important lesson came after he was dead. A good miner never abandons his post, even when his shift is over. The dead miners of Clinch Mountain are still on duty, and they always will be, as long as there are companies more interested in profits than in the people who risk their lives to dig those profits out of the ground. Some say that's a ghost story. I say it's just the truth about mining in America. Either way, those 73 men are still protecting miners today. And as long as I'm alive, I'll make sure their story gets told. Because the dead deserve justice, and the living deserve to go home safe at the end of their shift. That's not asking too much, is it? My name is Catherine Drummond, and I was the first woman to patrol Dolly Sods alone. They said a woman couldn't handle the wilderness. They were wrong about that. They were right about what was waiting for me. October 1969 inches, the Monongahela National Forest meant early snow and empty trails. Most folks stayed home when the weather turned cold. That's how I liked it. 13 years wearing this ranger uniform, and I still preferred the quiet mountains to dealing with people who thought I didn't belong here. The radio crackled as I checked in from the Dolly Sods Plateau. Base, this is Ranger Drummond, starting my weekly patrol of the wilderness area. Copy, Drummond. Static filled the pause. You sure you don't want backup? Weather's supposed to get worse. I adjusted my pack and looked across the strange, beautiful plateau. Dolly Sods didn't look like the rest of West Virginia. Up here, it felt more like Canada. Open spaces covered in low bushes and scattered rocks, with thick spruce forests around the edges. The early settlers had burned and logged everything flat, leaving this weird, wonderful place behind. I'm fine, Base. Radio check tomorrow at 1800. I clicked off before they could argue. The truth was, I needed to be alone out here. My divorce had just gone through, and every person back in town looked at me like I was broken. Like maybe my ex-husband had been right when he said I cared more about trees than being a proper wife. Maybe he was. The snow crunched under my boots as I headed toward Red Creek. This was my favorite part of the job, the real wilderness education work. I was documenting the unique plants that grew up here, species that couldn't survive anywhere else in the state. Today, I wanted to check on a rare orchid colony I'd found last month. Something felt different, though. Usually, I'd see squirrels, hear birds, maybe spot a deer. Today, the forest was perfectly quiet. Not even wind in the trees. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. 20 minutes later, I found the first campsite. Someone had set up a small tent in a clearing I'd never seen before, which was strange. I knew every trail and camping spot in this area. The tent was a pretty blue color, and next to it sat a neat pile of firewood and a circle of stones for a fire. But no people. No sounds. No footprints in the snow except my own. Hello? I called out. Anyone here? The silence seemed to swallow my voice. I walked around the camp. Everything was clean and organized, like someone had just stepped away for a few minutes. A small bouquet of wildflowers sat on a flat rock near the tent. Purple asters and goldenrod that shouldn't still be blooming in October. Inside the tent, I found 2 sleeping bags, 2 plates, 2 cups, but only 1 backpack. My skin started to crawl. In 13 years of ranger work, I'd seen plenty of abandoned camps. Usually, they were messy, food scattered around, trash everywhere, gear left behind when people got scared or lost. This looked like someone had carefully set up a romantic campsite for 2 people, then vanished. I pulled out my notebook and wrote down the location, though I couldn't figure out exactly where I was. My compass kept spinning, pointing in different directions every time I looked at it. That was weird too. Compasses didn't just break for no reason. The flowers bothered me most. I knew plants, and those species should have been dead for weeks. But they looked fresh picked, still bright and sweet smelling. I took some photos and continued my patrol. Maybe the campers had gone for a hike and would be back. Maybe there was a simple explanation, but as I walked deeper into the dolly sods, that perfect silence followed me. No birds, no insects, no sound except my boots in the snow and my own breathing. And somehow, I kept smelling those impossible flowers. The second campsite made my hands shake. I found it just before sunset, tucked in a grove of red spruce that definitely hadn't been there on my last patrol. The trees formed a perfect circle around another blue tent, another neat pile of firewood, another bouquet of October flowers that should have been dead. But this time, I could see where someone had been sleeping. 2 sleeping bags, zipped together. The impression of 2 bodies still pressed into the fabric. One larger, one smaller. A woman's hiking boots sat neatly beside the tent opening, still damp with morning dew. No sign of anyone. I called out again, louder this time. Forest Service. Is anyone here? Are you hurt? The echo came back wrong. Instead of fading away, my voice seemed to hang in the air, then change into something that sounded like laughter. Female laughter. Happy laughter. I spun around, searching the trees. Hello, ma'am? I'm a ranger. If you need help. The laughter stopped. The silence pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. Inside this tent, I found something that made my stomach drop. A woman's journal, open to the last entry. Asterisk, day 3. I can't believe how perfect this is. James appeared just when I needed him most. He knows exactly what to say, exactly how to make me feel beautiful. We're going to be married tomorrow in the clearing he showed me. I've never been so happy. I wish this could last forever. Asterisk. The handwriting was shaky, like the woman had been crying while she wrote it, but happy tears from the words. I flipped back through the pages. The woman's name was Linda Morrison, from Pittsburgh. She'd come up here alone for a weekend hiking trip after a bad breakup. The first few entries were sad, full of anger at her ex-boyfriend and worry about hiking alone. Then, halfway through, asterisk, met the most wonderful man today. James helped me set up camp and shared his dinner. He's everything. Tom wasn't kind, funny, really listens when I talk. Going to hike with him tomorrow. Asterisk. After that, every entry glowed with happiness. James was perfect. James understood her like no one ever had. James made her feel like a princess in a fairy tale. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. I checked my incident reports. Linda Morrison had been reported missing 6 days ago when she didn't return from her hiking trip. Search and rescue had found her car at the trailhead but no trace of her. My radio wouldn't work in the grove. Too much interference, like the trees were blocking the signal. I marked the location in my notebook, though the compass still spun wildly. Then I started hiking toward higher ground to call it in. That's when I saw him, just for a second, through the trees ahead of me. A man in a red jacket, walking away from the trail. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew these mountains well. Hey, I shouted, stop. Forest Service. He kept walking, disappearing behind a stand of thick spruce. I ran after him, crashing through branches and underbrush. When I reached the spot where he'd been, I found nothing. No footprints in the snow, no broken branches, no sign anyone had passed this way. But I could smell something sweet and warm, like flowers and honey. In the middle of an October blizzard, I made camp early that night, choosing a spot near the radio tower where I could get a clear signal. When I finally reached base, I kept my report simple. Found evidence of missing hiker Linda Morrison. Abandoned campsite with personal effects. Requesting search and rescue team for morning. Copy that, Drummond. You okay up there? You sound rattled. I looked out at the dark forest. Somewhere in those trees was a woman who'd been missing for almost a week, and a man named James who didn't exist in any of her descriptions before she reached Dolly Sods. I'm fine. Just send that team first thing, okay? Will do. Stay safe. But as I settled into my sleeping bag, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Like someone was watching me from the darkness between the trees. Someone who smelled like impossible flowers and knew how to walk through snow without leaving tracks. I dreamed about laughter that night, female voices, happy and bright, calling out to someone they loved. When I woke up at dawn, there were fresh flowers scattered around my tent. Purple asters and goldenrod. Still blooming, still sweet, still impossible. The search and rescue team found Linda Morrison's body at sunrise. She was lying in a small clearing about half a mile from her campsite, wearing a white dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was braided with flowers, the same purple asters and goldenrod that kept appearing everywhere. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping, but her skin was paper white, and when the medical examiner checked her pulse, there was nothing. Linda Morrison had been dead for at least 3 days. Hypothermia, said Jim Collins, the lead ranger who'd come up with the team. Poor girl probably got lost, tried to walk out in that white dress. Crazy thing to wear camping. I knelt beside the body. The dress was beautiful, silk and lace, like something from a fancy wedding. It fit Linda perfectly, even though her journal had mentioned packing only hiking clothes. Jim, where would she get a dress like this? He shrugged. Maybe she brought it. Women pack all kinds of things. The way he said, women made my teeth clench. Like we were mysterious creatures who did things for no reason. She was an experienced hiker. She wouldn't pack a wedding dress for a weekend camping trip. Well, she's wearing it now. Jim stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. Catherine, you've been up here alone too long. It's making you paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I was scared. While the team prepared to carry Linda's body down the mountain, I went back to her campsite. In daylight, the grove of red spruce looked normal. Just trees arranged in a rough circle. But my compass still spun wildly, and the air still smelled like flowers. Inside Linda's tent, I found something new. Another journal entry, written in the same handwriting but dated yesterday. Asterisk. The wedding was beautiful. James looked so handsome waiting for me in the clearing. I've never felt love like this. We're going to be together forever now. I'm so happy I could die. Asterisk. My hands shook as I read it. Linda had been dead for 3 days. She couldn't have written anything yesterday. But there it was, in her own handwriting. I heard voices outside the tent. The search team was coming back. Quickly, I tore out the new page and shoved it in my pocket. If I showed it to Jim, he'd just say I was seeing things, making up stories because I was a woman alone in the woods, letting my imagination run wild. Drummond, Jim called. Pack it up. We're heading down. As we hiked back toward civilization, Jim fell into step beside me. You did good work finding her, he said, but this place is getting to you. Maybe you should take some leave time. I'm fine. Are you? Because the boys at the station are saying you've been acting strange lately, talking about things that don't make sense. I stopped walking. What boys, what things? Just, look, Catherine, we all know the divorce was hard on you, and being up here alone so much, it's not natural for a woman. Maybe it's time to consider a desk job. Something more suitable. The word suitable hit me like a slap. I'd heard it my whole life. Women should do suitable work. Suitable women didn't spend weeks alone in the wilderness. Suitable women got married and stayed married and never challenged what men thought was right. I'm not taking a desk job, Jim. Think about it. That's all I'm asking. That night, back at the ranger station, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Linda's journal entry, the one that couldn't exist. So I drove back to headquarters and pulled the missing person files. 3 women had vanished in the Dolly Sods area in the past 2 years. All experienced hikers, all found dead of hypothermia, wearing clothes they hadn't packed. All discovered in peaceful poses, like they'd simply laid down to sleep. Margaret Chen from D.C., found wearing a blue silk evening gown. Sarah Williams from Baltimore, found in a cream-colored dress with tiny pearl buttons. Rebecca Martinez from Virginia Beach, found in a pink sundress with a pattern of roses. All beautiful dresses, all impossible to pack for a camping trip. I drove back up to Dolly Sods before dawn, telling myself I needed to collect more evidence. But really, I needed to prove I wasn't going crazy. The forest felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Warmer, despite the October cold. And as I hiked toward the area where Linda had been found, I started to hear music. Soft, sweet music, like someone playing a violin very far away. I followed the sound deeper into the trees, past places I'd never explored before. The music led me to a clearing I didn't recognize, a perfect circle of grass surrounded by white birch trees. In the center stood an altar made of stones, decorated with fresh flowers. And standing beside the altar, waiting for me, was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. He was tall and strong, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a simple white shirt and dark pants, and when he saw me, his face lit up like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever said. "Catherine," he said, and his voice was warm honey. "I've been waiting for you. I should have run." Every instinct I'd developed in 13 years of wilderness work screamed at me to turn around and get out of that clearing. But when he said my name, something deep inside me melted. "How do you know who I am?" He stepped closer, and I caught that sweet scent again. Flowers and honey and something else. Something that made me want to breathe deeper. Step closer, trust him completely. "I know you're brave," he said. "I know you're lonely. I know you're tired of fighting for everything you've earned." He was right about all of it. I was tired of proving myself over and over, tired of sleeping alone, tired of being looked at like I was broken or wrong or somehow less than. "What's your name?" I asked. "James." Of course it was James, the same name from Linda's journal, but somehow that didn't seem important anymore. "Would you like to sit with me, Catherine? Just for a minute?" There was a fallen log near the altar, perfectly positioned like a bench. I found myself walking toward it, even though part of my mind was screaming warnings I couldn't quite hear. We sat together in the dawn light, and he told me about himself. He'd been living in these mountains for years, he said. He loved the wilderness like I did. He understood what it meant to feel out of place in the world, to be different from everyone else. "You're not like other women," he said, and the words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. "You're special, strong, independent." I'd never had anyone say those words like they were good things. As the sun rose higher, he showed me around the clearing. He knew the name of every plant, every bird call. He pointed out details I'd never noticed before. The way the morning light filtered through the birch leaves, the perfect symmetry of the stone altar, the soft grass that felt like carpet under our feet. "This could be our place," he said softly. "Just ours. No one to judge you, no one to tell you what you should or shouldn't do." It was everything I'd ever wanted to hear. We spent the day together, talking and laughing and sharing stories. He brought out a picnic lunch that seemed to appear from nowhere. Fresh bread, cheese, wine that tasted like summer. I told him about my divorce, about the constant fight to be taken seriously as a ranger, about how lonely I'd been. He listened like no one had ever listened before. As evening approached, he took my hands in his. His skin was warm despite the October cold. "Catherine," he said, "I want to ask you something important." My heart started beating faster. In the back of my mind, a tiny voice was screaming about missing women and impossible journal entries and bodies in wedding dresses. But that voice felt very far away. "Will you marry me?" The words hung in the air like music. I looked into his kind eyes and saw my future there. No more loneliness, no more fighting, no more proving myself to people who would never accept me anyway. Just love. Just peace. "Yes," I whispered. He smiled, and for just a second, his face seemed to shift. For just a moment, I thought I saw something else underneath, something hungry and ancient and not human at all. But then he was kissing me, and the world went soft and warm and perfect. When I opened my eyes, I was wearing a white dress. It was beautiful, silk and lace and tiny pearl buttons, exactly my size, exactly my style. I couldn't remember changing clothes, but somehow I was standing at the altar in the clearing, holding a bouquet of purple asters and goldenrod. And James was beside me, wearing a black suit, looking more handsome than any real man had the right to be. "You're so beautiful, Catherine," he said. "Are you ready?" Ready for what? I tried to think, but my mind felt foggy. Somewhere far away, that tiny voice was still screaming. Something about Linda Morrison. Something about dead women in impossible dresses. I started to say something, but James put a finger to my lips. "Shh. Don't think so much. Just feel." He was right. Thinking was hard. Feeling was easy. And I felt loved and wanted and perfect. The ceremony began without a minister, without witnesses, without anything but the two of us and the stone altar and the flowers. James spoke words in a language I didn't recognize, but somehow I understood them. Promises of eternal love. Vows to be together forever. "Do you, Catherine, take me as your husband, for all time, in this life and whatever comes after?" The words should have scared me. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I do." "Do you give me your heart, your soul, your very essence, to cherish and protect forever?" That tiny voice was screaming louder now. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. But James was so beautiful. And I was so tired of being alone. "I do." He smiled, and this time I clearly saw his face change. His features shifted like water, becoming more beautiful, more perfect, more exactly what I wanted to see. His eyes went black for just a moment, and his teeth looked sharp. "Then kiss me, my bride. Seal our bond forever." He leaned toward me, and I could feel something pulling at my chest, like he was drawing something out of me. Something important, something I needed to live. The tiny voice in my head became a roar. I jerked backward, stumbling away from the altar. The bouquet fell from my hands, and when it hit the ground, the flowers turned black and crumbled to dust. "No." My voice came out as a croak. "No, this isn't right." James's perfect face twisted with anger. "Catherine, don't ruin this. We're so close to forever." But I was remembering now. Linda Morrison, dead in a white dress. Margaret Chen in blue silk. Sarah Williams in cream and pearls. All of them found peaceful and drained and dead. All of them married to James. "You killed them," I whispered. His beautiful mask slipped away completely. What stood in front of me wasn't human. It was something old and hungry, with shifting features and black eyes and a smile full of sharp teeth. "I loved them," it said, "just like I love you. They gave themselves to me willingly. They were happy. They're dead. They're with me forever." Isn't that what every woman wants? Perfect love that never ends? I backed toward the edge of the clearing, but the trees had changed. Instead of birches, they were thick spruces that formed an unbreakable wall. I was trapped. "Don't fight this, Catherine." You said yes. You put on the dress. You spoke the vows. The bond is almost complete. It stepped toward me, and with each step, it grew larger, more terrible, but also more beautiful, showing me exactly the man I'd always dreamed of loving. "One kiss," it whispered. "That's all. One kiss, and you'll never be lonely again, never be afraid again, never have to prove yourself to anyone again." I wanted it. God help me, even knowing what it was, I wanted it. But I thought about Linda Morrison, writing in her journal after she was already dead. I thought about all those women who'd given up everything for perfect love and found only death. I thought about my climbing gear. My carabiners were made of iron. The iron burned the thing like fire. I yanked the carabiner from my belt and pressed it against the creature's arm as it reached for me. It screamed, a sound like breaking glass and dying animals, and jumped backward. Where the iron had touched, its beautiful skin was black and smoking. "Iron disrupts the magic," I said, more to myself than to it. Old folk tales my grandmother had told me, stories I'd dismissed as superstition. "You can't hold your shape around iron." The creature's face flickered between James and something horrible. "You don't understand," it hissed. "I can give you everything. Love, beauty, happiness. No more fighting, no more proving yourself. Just peace." "That's not peace," I said, backing toward what I hoped was still the edge of the clearing. "That's death." "What's the difference?" It was changing shape rapidly now, becoming different men. My ex-husband, but kinder, actors from movies, combinations of features designed to make me weak with want. "Look at your life, Catherine. Look how alone you are. How hard you fight for scraps of respect. I can give you worship instead." For a moment, I almost listened. It was true. My life was hard and lonely and full of people who would never see me as equal. The creature was offering everything I'd ever wanted. But Linda Morrison had wanted the same thing. And now she was dead. I pulled out my other carabiners, holding them like weapons. The creature backed away, its beautiful faces twisting with rage and hunger. "This isn't over," it said. "There are other mountains, other lonely women. You can't save them all. Maybe not. But I can save myself." I held the iron high and walked toward the edge of the clearing. This time, the trees parted like curtains. The creature's scream followed me as I crashed through the forest, still wearing the white dress, still carrying my climbing gear. When I reached my truck at dawn, the dress crumbled away like old paper. I was back in my ranger uniform, like the whole thing had been a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I found 8 more bodies over the next 3 days. Women who'd been missing from other areas, all dressed in beautiful gowns, all drained of life. The official reports blamed hypothermia and exposure. No one wanted to hear about creatures that fed on loneliness and love. I put in for a transfer to a different forest, told my supervisor I needed a change after finding so many bodies. He was relieved. One less problem woman to deal with. But before I left, I did something that probably saved lives. I started teaching other female park employees about the warning signs. How to recognize when someone was too perfect, too understanding, too exactly what you wanted. How loneliness could make you vulnerable to things that hunted by offering love. Most of them thought I was crazy. A few listened. I still work in the wilderness, 30 years later. I never married. Not because I don't want love, but because I learned the difference between love and hunger. Between someone who accepts you and someone who wants to consume you. Sometimes I get reports from other forests. Women hikers found dead in impossible dresses. Always peaceful. Always alone. Always after meeting a helpful man named James or David or Michael. The creature was right. I can't save them all. But I try to save the ones I can. And I keep iron carabiners on my belt, just in case something perfect ever tries to love me to death again. The Dolly Sods is still beautiful, still strange, still full of plants and places that don't exist anywhere else. I just don't hike there alone anymore. Not because I'm afraid of the wilderness, because I'm afraid of what hunts there, wearing the face of everything a lonely woman thinks she wants. Love should make you stronger, not steal your strength. Love should set you free, not trap you in a perfect prison. And love should never, ever require you to die for it. Remember that, if you're ever in the mountains and meet someone too good to be true. Remember that and keep some iron close. Just in case. My name is Benjamin Ashworth, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years now. Before that, I spent 2 tours in Vietnam, crawling through jungles that wanted to kill me in a dozen different ways. I thought I knew what death looked like. I thought I understood disease and suffering. I was wrong. It was June of 1974 when everything started going bad at Laurel Falls. The heat that summer was something else, thick and heavy like a wet blanket you couldn't shake off. I was working the trail maintenance in Cherokee National Forest, mostly alone since my partner got called away for a wildfire up north. Didn't bother me much. After Vietnam, I preferred the quiet. The rhododendron was in full bloom that month, creating these tunnel-like passages along the trails. Beautiful, sure, but they made the paths feel like you were walking through green caves. Sometimes you couldn't see more than 10 feet ahead. The flowers were pretty, but they made the air smell too sweet, almost sickly. I'd been married to Sarah for 12 years, and we had our daughter Emma. Sweet kid, but she was born with this rare blood disease that the doctors couldn't fix. Sarah blamed me for it, said it was something I brought back from the war, some chemical or poison that got into my blood. Maybe she was right, I didn't know anymore. That's why I took extra shifts in the park. The overtime money helped pay for Emma's treatments, and honestly, it was easier than being home watching Sarah cry over our daughter's medicine bottles. The area around Laurel Falls had always felt different from the rest of the forest. The Cherokee used to bring their sick there, back in the old days. There was something about the water, they said. Of course, that was before the influenza pandemic in 1918. Lost a lot of people that year, buried them quick and quiet up in the hills. Old-timers still talked about it sometimes, but I didn't put much stock in ghost stories. I was a practical man. In the Army, they taught us that every problem has a solution, and every solution involves the right tool, and the right training. Disease, you fight it with medicine. Enemy, you fight them with weapons. Fear, you fight it with facts and preparation. That Tuesday morning started normal enough. I was checking the trail markers near the falls when I found the first hiker. Young woman, maybe 25, sitting on a log beside the path. At first I thought she was just resting, but when I got closer, I could see something was wrong. Miss, you okay? She looked up at me with these glassy eyes. Her skin was pale and sweaty, even though it wasn't that hot yet. I don't feel right, she said. Her voice was weak, like she'd been sick for days. What's wrong? You hurt yourself? No, I feel weak. Really weak. Like I'm dying or something. She tried to stand up but had to sit back down right away. I checked her over with my first aid training. No fever, no obvious injuries, pupils looked normal. But something about her just seemed wrong. Like she was fading away right in front of me. When did this start? I asked. About an hour ago. I was fine when I started hiking. Then I got to that thick part with all the flowers, and suddenly I couldn't breathe right. Now I can barely walk. I radioed for help and stayed with her until the ambulance came. Took them almost an hour to get up the mountain road. By the time they loaded her up, she looked even worse. The paramedics said her blood pressure was way too low, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. That was the first one. Over the next week, 6 more hikers got sick on that same stretch of trail. All healthy people who just suddenly got weak and sick for no reason the doctors could find. The CDC sent a guy up from Atlanta to check for contamination or disease, but he couldn't find anything either. Dr. Martinez was his name. Smart guy, real careful about everything. He wore a full hazmat suit just to walk the trails, took samples of everything. Water, soil, plants, air. All the tests came back normal. It's the strangest thing, he told me on his 3rd day there. These people are showing symptoms of severe anemia and immune system failure, but there's no cause we can identify. No bacteria, no virus, no chemicals, no radiation, nothing. That's when I started paying closer attention to the area itself. I'd walked those trails hundreds of times, but now I was really looking, and what I saw made my skin crawl. The vegetation was wrong. Not all of it, just patches here and there. In perfect circles, maybe 10 feet across, the rhododendron leaves were turning brown and curly. The flowers were dropping off early, but right next to these dead spots, everything else was growing like crazy, too green, too thick. Then I found the dead animals. Squirrels, mostly, but some birds too. They weren't scattered around like you'd expect from predators or disease. They were arranged in neat little rows, like someone had lined them up on purpose. All of them looked thin and sick, even though there was plenty of food around. The smell was the worst part. In those dead patches, there was this sweet, rotten smell, like flowers mixed with sickness. It reminded me of the field hospitals in Vietnam, that smell of medicine and death that got into your clothes and never came out. My radio started acting up around those spots too. Instead of clear signals, I'd get static that almost sounded like breathing. Slow, labored breathing, like someone dying of lung disease. But I was still thinking logically. Had to be environmental contamination of some kind, maybe something buried in the old days, or chemicals from a plane crash. I reported it all to my supervisor and recommended they close that section of trail until we figured out what was making people sick. That's what I believed then, that it was something normal, something we could understand and fix. I was about to learn how wrong I was. The next morning, I got a call that changed everything. Another hiker was down, but this one was different. She was still conscious, still talking, but she couldn't move. I found her about a quarter mile up the trail, lying on her back in a patch of dying rhododendron. Young college kid, maybe 19 or 20. Her eyes were wide open and tracking me, but the rest of her body was completely still. "Help me," she whispered when I knelt down beside her. I can't move anything." "What happened? Did you fall?" "No, I was sleeping, right here." I know that was stupid, but I got so tired all of a sudden. Then something crawled over me. My skin went cold. "What do you mean, crawled over you?" It was heavy and wet. I could feel it moving across my chest, but I couldn't open my eyes. It touched my face with its hands, and they were wrong. Sick, really sick. I looked around the area where she was lying. The ground was soft from recent rain, and I could see her footprints where she'd walked in. But there were other marks, too. Handprints, but not normal ones. They were too long, with fingers that seemed to drag through the dirt. And where these prints were, the ground looked diseased, dark and oily. Did you see what it was? No, but I heard it breathing, real slow and wet, like it was drowning, and it smelled like a hospital, like medicine and sickness. I called for another ambulance and tried to keep her talking while we waited. She said her name was Lisa, and she was hiking alone because her boyfriend had broken up with her. She'd been feeling fine until she reached this particular spot, then suddenly got overwhelmingly tired. The weird thing is, she said, I dreamed about it before it happened. In my dream, I was lying here just like this, and this thing came crawling through the bushes. It looked like a person, but wrong. Sick. It had sores all over its skin, and it was crawling because it was too weak to stand up. Dreams can feel pretty real when you're stressed, I said, but my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. This wasn't a dream. I could smell it. I could feel how cold and wet its skin was, and when it touched my face, I could feel the sickness going into me, like poison, but worse. The ambulance took her away, but I stayed at that spot for a long time, studying those handprints. They led from the thick rhododendron bushes down to where Lisa had been lying, then back into the vegetation. But the strange thing was, they didn't go very far. About 20 feet into the bushes, they just stopped. I followed them as far as I could, pushing through the thick branches. The smell was stronger here, that mix of flowers and sickness that made my stomach turn. The leaves were all wrong, covered in this oily substance that made them look diseased. Then I heard it, breathing, slow and labored, like someone dying of lung disease. But when I stopped to listen, it stopped too. When I moved, it started again. Hello? I called out. Is someone there? Do you need help? Silence. Then, very faintly, I heard something moving through the bushes. Not walking, crawling, something heavy dragging itself across the ground. I followed the sound, but it stayed just ahead of me, always out of sight. Every few minutes, I'd find more of those handprints in the soft ground. They were getting fresher, the oily substance around them still wet. Dr. Martinez found me there an hour later, covered in scratches from pushing through the rhododendron. He was excited about something. Ben, I need to show you what I found. He led me back toward the trail. I've been studying the soil samples, and there's something very strange. In those dead patches, I'm finding organic compounds that shouldn't exist. What kind of compounds? Medical compounds from the early 1900s. Specific medicines that were used to treat influenza during the 1918 pandemic. But here's the thing. These compounds are fresh. They're not old residue. Someone is actively introducing them into the environment. That made no sense. Those medicines hadn't been manufactured in decades. You sure about that? Positive. And there's something else. I found glass fragments buried in those spots. Old medical bottles, the kind they used for liquid medicines back then. But again, the glass isn't weathered like it should be if it had been buried for 50 years. We walked back to the spot where I'd found Lisa. Dr. Martinez took more samples while I examined the handprints. They were still there, clear as day in the soft earth. Martinez, look at this. I showed him the prints. What do you think made these? He knelt down and studied them carefully. His face went pale. These are human handprints, but the proportions are wrong. The fingers are too long. And look at this. He pointed to dark stains around each print. This looks like bodily fluids, blood and pus, maybe. From what? I don't know, but I want to test it. He carefully scraped some of the dark substance into a sample container. Ben, I think we need to close this entire area. Not just for contamination. I think there's someone out there who's very sick. Maybe hallucinating or mentally unstable. These handprints suggest they're crawling around on their hands and knees, possibly spreading disease. That made sense. More sense than what Lisa had described, anyway. You think someone's living out here? Maybe someone with a severe infection or mental illness? It would explain everything. The medical compounds, the handprints, why people are getting sick, if someone with a contagious disease is making contact with hikers. But even as he said it, I could see the doubt in his eyes. Because there were things that theory didn't explain. like how the handprints just stopped 20 feet into the bushes, like how something could move through dense vegetation without leaving a trail, like how the breathing sounds seemed to come from nowhere. That night, I went home and told Sarah about what was happening. She was feeding Emma her medicine, and our daughter looked so small and pale. The disease was getting worse, and the treatments weren't helping much anymore. Maybe you should request a transfer, Sarah said. Work somewhere else until they figure out what's wrong with that area. Can't do that. They need someone with medical training to help with this investigation. Besides, the overtime money. The money isn't worth your life, Ben. But it wasn't just about money. Something about this whole situation was bothering me in a way I couldn't explain. It felt personal, like something was specifically targeting the people who came to that area. And I had this growing feeling that it was getting stronger. The next morning, I got a call that proved I was right. Dr. Martinez had been found unconscious on the trail, wearing full protective gear. He'd been fine the day before, but now he was in the hospital with the same mysterious illness as all the others. Whatever was out there, it didn't care about hazmat suits or scientific explanations. And it was coming for anyone who got too close to its territory. I visited Dr. Martinez in the hospital that afternoon. He looked terrible, pale, and weak, like all the others. But he was still conscious, still trying to make sense of what had happened to him. "It doesn't make sense, Ben," he whispered. His voice was so weak, I had to lean close to hear him. I was wearing full protective gear, filtered air supply, sealed suit, everything. There's no way I could have been exposed to a biological contaminant. "Tell me what happened." "I was taking samples near that spot where you found the handprints. Everything was normal, all my instruments were working fine. Then I started hearing things." "What kind of things?" "Breathing. But not regular breathing. It sounded like someone drowning in their own lungs, and it was coming from right behind me, but when I turned around, nothing was there." He closed his eyes, remembering. "Then I felt it, something touching my suit. I could see the fabric moving, like fingers were running along it, but I couldn't see what was doing it. That's when my air supplies started acting up." "Acting up how?" "The air started tasting wrong, sweet and sick, like breathing in a room full of dying flowers. But that's impossible. The suit has its own air supply. Nothing should have been able to get in." I asked him about the test results on the dark substance around the handprints. His face got even paler. "That's the strangest part. The fluid contains traces of every major pandemic disease from the last century. Influenza, tuberculosis, cholera, typhus, diseases that were wiped out decades ago. But they're not active infections. It's like the memory of disease." "What does that mean?" "I don't know. The compounds are there, but they're not behaving like normal biological agents. It's as if something is recreating the molecular signature of historical diseases without actually creating the diseases themselves." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Martinez had said and about the history of that area. The Cherokee had brought their sick there for generations. Then came 1918, and the influenza pandemic killed hundreds of people in these mountains. They buried them quickly, in mass graves up in the hills. The next morning, I decided to do some research at the County Historical Society. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the place, was an old Cherokee woman who knew all the local stories. "Oh yes," she said when I asked about the Laurel Falls area. "That's where the sickness spirit lives. My grandmother told me about it when I was young." Sickness spirit? During the pandemic, so many people died that they couldn't bury them properly. Just dug big holes and put them all together. But according to Cherokee belief, when people die from disease and aren't given proper burial rites, their spirits can't rest. They become hungry for the life they lost. She pulled out an old book with faded photographs. "Look here, this is from 1919, after the pandemic ended." The photograph showed a group of men standing around several large holes in the ground. Bodies were stacked like firewood, covered with lime and dirt. The location looked familiar. I could see the distinctive rock formations that were near the current trail system. My grandmother said the spirit would crawl through the forest, looking for healthy people to share its sickness with. She said it looked like a person, but covered in the diseases that killed it. And it couldn't stand up because it was too weak, so it crawled on its hands and knees. The description made my blood run cold. It was exactly what Lisa had told me. "Mrs. Henderson, did your grandmother ever say how to stop something like this?" She said you had to cleanse the burial ground, purify it with fire and prayer. But that was just old superstition. You don't believe in such things, do you, Mr. Ashworth? I didn't answer. 2 days ago, I would have said no. But now I wasn't sure what I believed. That afternoon, I went back to the trail with a different mindset. Instead of looking for logical explanations, I tried to see the area the way the Cherokee might have. And what I saw made everything make horrible sense. The dead patches of vegetation were in a perfect pattern, forming a rough circle about a quarter-mile across. In the center of that circle, hidden by thick rhododendron, I found what I was looking for. It was an old depression in the ground, maybe 30 feet long and 20 feet wide. The earth was different here, darker, richer, like it had been fertilized with something organic, and scattered around the edges were pieces of old glass and metal, medical bottles, syringes, even parts of what looked like old hospital beds. This was where they'd buried the pandemic victims, and somehow, something was still alive down there. I was taking pictures of the site when I heard the breathing again. Closer this time, and definitely real. It was coming from the thick bushes at the edge of the burial ground. "Hello?" I called out. "I know you're there. I want to help." The breathing stopped. Then I heard movement, something heavy dragging itself through the undergrowth. It was circling me, staying just out of sight. I followed the sounds, pushing through branches that seemed to grab at my clothes. The smell was overwhelming now, that mixture of flowers and sickness and death, and underneath it all was another smell, one I recognized from Vietnam, the smell of infected wounds. Then I saw it, just for a second, through a gap in the leaves. It was crawling on its hands and knees like Lisa had described, but it was worse than anything she could have imagined. Its skin was gray and covered in open sores that wept constantly. Its hair was falling out in patches, and its clothes were rotted rags that might have been a hospital gown once. But the worst part was its face. It looked human, but wrong. The eyes were sunken and yellow, and its mouth hung open like it couldn't breathe properly. When it saw me looking, it opened its mouth wider and let out this wet, gasping sound that might have been words. Then it disappeared back into the bushes. I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I crashed through those rhododendron bushes like the devil was chasing me, and maybe he was. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. This wasn't contamination or mental illness or any kind of normal explanation. This was something that should not exist, but did. And it was getting stronger. I could feel it in the air, in the way the shadows seemed darker and the silence seemed heavier. Whatever that thing was, it was feeding on the sickness it spread. Every person who got sick made it more real, more powerful. I drove straight to the hospital to check on Dr. Martinez and the other victims. What I found there made my worst fears real. 3 of them had died during the night. Not from any disease the doctors could identify, but from what looked like multiple organ failure. And the others were getting worse, developing symptoms of diseases that hadn't existed for decades. But the most frightening thing was what Martinez told me when I found him barely conscious in his bed. "It spoke to me," he whispered. "In my dreams. It said it was hungry. It said it had been hungry for so long, waiting in the dark. And now it was strong enough to feed again. What did it want? To spread, to grow, to make the whole forest sick like it is. And Ben," his eyes focused on me with terrible clarity, "it knows about your daughter. It knows about her disease. It wants to help her." That's when I knew this thing wasn't just randomly attacking hikers. It was specifically targeting me, using my own daughter's illness to draw me in. And I realized that everything that had happened so far was just the beginning. It was calling me home. I drove home that night faster than I ever had before. Sarah's car was in the driveway, but all the lights in the house were off except for Emma's room. My heart was pounding as I ran up the front steps. Sarah met me at the door. Her face was pale, and she looked terrified. "Ben, something's wrong with Emma. She's been talking about a friend who visits her at night. Someone who crawls under her window and tells her stories about being sick." I pushed past her and ran to Emma's room. My 8-year-old daughter was sitting up in bed, and she looked better than she had in months. Her cheeks had color, her eyes were bright, and she was smiling. "Daddy, my friend said you'd be coming home tonight." "What friend, sweetheart?" "The sick man. He comes to visit me when you're at work. He told me he used to be sick like me, but now he's not sick anymore. He said he can make me better too. Sarah grabbed my arm. Ben, she's been talking like this for 2 days. And her blood work. The doctors can't explain it. Her red blood cell count is actually improving. Where does your friend come from, Emma? From the forest. He crawls here because he's too tired to walk, but he doesn't mind. He says when you're really sick for a long time, you learn to live with it. He wants to teach me how. He wants to teach me how. I knelt down beside her bed. Emma, I need you to tell me exactly what this friend looks like. He's gray, and he has sores on his skin, but they don't hurt him anymore. His clothes are old and torn, and he smells like the medicine I have to take. But he's nice, Daddy. He understands what it's like to be sick all the time. Sarah was crying quietly behind me. Ben, what's happening to our daughter? I knew exactly what was happening. That thing had found Emma and was trying to make her like itself. It was using her disease as a connection, promising to take away her pain by making her something else entirely. Emma, I need you to promise me something. If your friend comes back, don't let him touch you. Don't let him come close to you at all. But Daddy, he's trying to help me. I know, sweetheart, but his kind of help isn't good help. Promise me. She nodded, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was 8 years old and in pain all the time, and something had offered to make that pain go away. How could she understand that some cures are worse than the disease? That night, I sat in Emma's room with my old service pistol loaded and ready. Sarah thought I was losing my mind, but she didn't argue. Around midnight, I heard it, scratching at the window, slow and deliberate, like fingernails on glass. Emma sat up in bed. Daddy, my friend is here. Stay in bed, Emma. Don't move. The scratching continued, and then I heard that wet, labored breathing from outside the window. A shadow moved across the glass. Something pressed against it from the outside. Then it spoke. Its voice was wet and broken, like someone talking with fluid in their lungs. Let me in, Benjamin. Let me help her. I know what it's like to watch your child suffer. I had children once, before the sickness took them. I can save her from that pain. Stay away from my daughter. You don't understand. I'm not here to hurt her. I'm here to free her. She's dying anyway, you know that. The doctors can't stop it, but I can. I can make her strong like me. She'll never feel pain again. The shadow at the window grew larger, and I could hear wet sounds like something pressing its body against the glass. Look at me, Benjamin. See what I really am. Against my better judgment, I looked at the window. The thing outside was pressed flat against the glass, and I could see it clearly for the first time. It had once been human, but the diseases had changed it into something else. Its skin was gray and mottled, covered in sores that wept constantly. Its eyes were yellow and filmed over, but they were looking right at me. I was a doctor, it said. During the pandemic, I tried to save everyone, but the sickness took them anyway. It took my wife, my children, my patients, then it took me. But I didn't die, Benjamin. I learned to live with the sickness, to make it part of me, and now I can share that gift. You're dead. You died in 1918. Death is just another kind of sickness, and I've learned to live with that too. Emma was staring at the window, fascinated. Daddy, he's right. He could help me. I wouldn't hurt anymore. Emma, no, that's not help. That's not living. The thing at the window started scratching again, more urgently this time. Let me in, Benjamin, or I'll find another way. I've been patient, but I'm getting stronger. Soon, I won't need your permission. I raised my pistol and aimed it at the window. Get away from my family. It laughed, a wet bubbling sound. Bullets won't hurt me, soldier. I'm already dead. But fire might work. Fire cleanses sickness. The Cherokee knew that. Then it was gone. The shadow disappeared from the window, and the breathing stopped. But I knew it would be back. The next morning, I made a decision that I knew might cost me everything. I was going to end this, one way or another. I drove to the nearest army surplus store and bought everything I needed: military-grade flamethrowers, fuel, and protective gear. If that thing wanted to play games with my family, it had chosen the wrong soldier. I spent the day preparing, cleaning my equipment, and planning my approach. That evening, I kissed Emma goodbye and told Sarah to take her to her mother's house until this was over. What are you going to do, Ben? What I should have done days ago. I'm going to kill it. You can't kill something that's already dead. Maybe not. but I can sure as hell try. As the sun set, I drove back to Laurel Falls with enough firepower to burn down half the forest if necessary. I was done being careful, done trying to understand. Some things couldn't be reasoned with, or studied, or explained away. Some things could only be destroyed. I found the burial ground just as darkness was falling. The smell was stronger than ever, and I could hear movement in the bushes all around me. It knew I was coming. "I'm here," I shouted. "You want to play, Doctor? Let's play." It came crawling out of the rhododendron like a nightmare made real. Up close, it was even worse than I'd imagined. The sores on its skin were moving, opening and closing like mouths. Its hospital gown was stained with decades of infection and decay. "You came," it said. "Good, we need to talk." "Nothing to talk about. Stay away from my daughter." "But I can help her, Benjamin. I can make her pain go away forever." "Isn't that what you want?" "Not like that. Not by making her into something like you." It crawled closer, dragging itself across the ground with those two long fingers. "You don't understand what I'm offering. Freedom from sickness, from pain, from the fear of death. Your daughter could live forever. That's not living. Then what is? Watching her waste away in a hospital bed? Pumping her full of medicines that don't work? Let me give her what the doctors can't." I raised the flamethrower. Last warning. It stopped crawling and looked up at me with those yellow eyes. "You know what's funny, Benjamin? I was like you once, a healer, a protector. I thought I could save everyone from the sickness. But the sickness taught me something important. Sometimes the only way to stop the pain is to embrace it." "You're insane." "No, I'm evolved. And your daughter could be too. She's already started changing, you know. My visits have been preparing her. Soon, she won't need those medicines anymore. Soon she'll be like me." That's when I pulled the trigger. The flame hit it square in the chest, and it screamed. Not a human scream, but the sound of 100 people dying all at once. The fire spread across its diseased skin, and I could smell burning flesh mixed with that sweet, sick odor. But it didn't die. It kept crawling toward me, even as the flames consumed it. "Fire cleanses," it said, its voice now just a whisper. "Thank you, Benjamin. I've been waiting so long to be clean again." As it burned, the diseased vegetation around the burial ground started burning too. The flames spread in perfect circles, cleansing the infected earth. And slowly, finally, the thing stopped moving. But even as it died, it spoke one last time. "Too late," it whispered. "She's already changing. You can kill me, but you can't stop what I've started." I burned everything. The burial ground, the diseased plants, even the old medical equipment scattered around the area. I burned until there was nothing left but clean earth and ash. Then I drove home as fast as I could, praying I wasn't too late to save my daughter. I found Sarah and Emma at Sarah's mother's house. Emma was sleeping, and for the first time in weeks, she looked peaceful. Sarah was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. "How is she?" I asked quietly. "Better. The doctors can't explain it, but her blood work has improved dramatically. They're calling it a miracle." Sarah looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Ben, what happened out there? It's over. The thing that was making people sick, it's gone." "What about Emma?" "She's been asking for her friend. She won't be seeing him anymore." Over the next few days, all the hikers in the hospital started getting better. Their mysterious illnesses just faded away, like they'd never existed. Dr. Martinez made a full recovery and went back to Atlanta with a report that blamed the outbreak on an unknown environmental contamination that had mysteriously cleared up. The trail system around Laurel Falls was closed permanently. Officially, it was due to unstable geological conditions. Unofficially, the Park Service didn't want to take any chances. Emma's disease went into remission. The doctors said it was impossible, that her condition doesn't just get better on its own, but they couldn't argue with the test results. Within a month, she was running around like any normal kid. But I noticed things. Small things that worried me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch her talking to herself in her room. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say, "No one," and change the subject. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, I'd see her crawling across the floor on her hands and knees, like she was practicing something. The nightmares started about a week after I burned the burial ground. Dreams of crawling through diseased vegetation, of touching sick people and making them better, of being hungry for something I couldn't name. I'd wake up with the taste of infection in my mouth and the smell of sickness in my nose. Sarah noticed the changes in me too. "You're different, Ben. Distant. Like you're thinking about something else all the time." She was right. I was thinking about what that thing had told me, that fire cleanses, but also that I was too late to stop what it had started with Emma. 6 months later, I got a call from a ranger station in North Carolina. They were having problems with hikers getting mysteriously sick on a trail near an old cemetery. The symptoms were familiar: sudden weakness, unexplained anemia, and stories about something crawling through the woods at night. I drove down there on my day off. The cemetery was from the Civil War era, full of soldiers who died from disease rather than battle wounds. And in the woods nearby, I found the same signs: diseased vegetation in perfect circles, dead animals arranged in patterns, and that sweet, sick smell that I'd learned to recognize. But this time was different. This time, I understood what I was looking at. The thing I'd killed wasn't unique. It was just one of many, scattered across the country wherever people had died from disease and been buried improperly. And they were all getting stronger. I started keeping a journal, documenting every case I could find, always near old burial grounds, always following the same pattern. The Cherokee had been right about one thing: spirits of the diseased dead don't rest easy. But they'd been wrong about something else. Fire doesn't always cleanse. Sometimes it just spreads the infection to new places. Emma is 12 now, and her health is perfect. Too perfect. She never gets colds, never gets hurt, heals from cuts and scrapes faster than she should. And sometimes, when she thinks I'm not looking, I catch her doing things that no normal kid should be able to do. Last week, I found her in the backyard with a dying bird. She was holding it in her hands, and I watched its broken wing heal right in front of my eyes. When she saw me watching, she just smiled and said, "I learned how to help things, Daddy, just like my friend taught me." The bird flew away, completely healed. And Emma went inside to wash her hands, humming a song I'd never heard before. I still work for the Park Service, but now I specialize in a different kind of problem. When rangers report mysterious illnesses near historical sites, they call me. I've become an expert in something that officially doesn't exist. Sarah doesn't know what I really do on these trips. She thinks I'm just consulting on environmental contamination cases. It's better that way. She doesn't need to know that her daughter isn't entirely human anymore, or that her husband spends his time hunting things that crawl through forests, spreading supernatural disease. But every night, I check Emma's room, and every night, I make sure my flamethrower is clean and ready. Because I've learned something important over the past few years. The thing in the rhododendron was right about one thing. Sometimes the only way to stop the pain is to embrace it. I just haven't decided yet whether I'm going to stop my daughter from becoming what she's becoming or help her learn to control it. The sickness is spreading, one healing touch at a time, and I'm the only one who knows how to fight it. The question is, do I want to? My name is Benjamin Ashworth, and I've seen things that would make most people lose their minds. But the worst part isn't the monsters in the forest. The worst part is that sometimes they're trying to help. My name is Rebecca Morrison, and I need to tell you what happened to me in the Cranberry Wilderness last October. I'm a park ranger, but before that, I was Dr. Rebecca Morrison, anthropology PhD, published researcher, the kind of person who believed everything could be explained if you just knew enough facts. I don't believe that anymore. I came to the Monongahela National Forest 12 years ago because I wanted to study Appalachian folklore where it actually lived, not in dusty university libraries. My specialty was witch trial history, how communities created supernatural stories to explain the horrible things they did to women who didn't fit in. Healers, midwives, women who owned property or spoke their minds. The witches were never real, I'd tell my students. They were just women who scared men in power. That's what I thought, anyway. The Cranberry Wilderness is 30 miles from the nearest cell tower, a high-altitude bog that most people never see. It's not the kind of place you stumble into. The hiking is brutal, the terrain is tricky, and most of the year it's too cold or too wet to be comfortable. But that's exactly why I loved it. Up there, surrounded by ancient trees and that strange spongy ground that squelches under your boots, I could think. I was supposed to be finishing my research on the 1600s witch executions. Local legends said innocent women were drowned in the bog, that Cherokee tribes used to hold sacred ceremonies there for women's rights. The kind of folklore that academics like me dissected patriarchy, using religion to control female autonomy, indigenous spirituality twisted by colonial fear. All of it. Just stories. Just history. I'd set up my research camp in late September, right as the tourists cleared out. My supervisor, Tom Hendricks, didn't love the idea of me staying out there alone during the off-season. But budget cuts meant I was the only ranger qualified to work the bog ecosystem anyway. Plus, I'd made it clear I didn't need a man hovering over my shoulder. Not anymore. My ex-husband, another anthropology professor, had spent 5 years telling me my research was derivative and my ideas needed refinement. His words for, "Shut up and let me take credit." When I finally left him 8 months ago, he'd called me ungrateful. Said I couldn't trust my own judgment without him. The wilderness was supposed to be where I proved him wrong. The harvest moon rose on October 12th, huge and orange, painting the bog in colors that didn't look quite real. That's when the weather changed. Early frost came down hard, making the wooden walkways slick and treacherous. At night, I could see strange lights dancing over the water willow, the wisps, caused by bog gases igniting. I knew the chemistry behind it, methane, phosphine, all perfectly explainable. But they looked like women. Like dancing, drowning women. I told myself it was just the lighting, just my brain finding patterns where none existed. That's what brains do. I had notebooks full of research on how folklore gets created. People see natural phenomena, their imagination fills in the narrative, and within a generation, it becomes truth. I understood how ghost stories were born. I just didn't understand yet that some of them were real. The first body showed up on October 15th. I was checking water quality samples near the eastern edge of the bog when I saw the boots. Nice hiking boots, expensive ones, sticking out from behind a clump of sphagnum moss. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up to what I was seeing. The man was face down in a shallow pool, maybe 6 inches of water. His backpack was still on, his GPS clipped to his belt. Everything looked normal except for one thing. It hadn't rained in 3 days. The pool he was lying in shouldn't have been there at all. I called it in on my radio, barely got through with the static, and started CPR, even though I could tell he was gone. His skin was cold, his lips blue. But when I turned him over, bog water poured from his mouth. Poured, like he'd swallowed gallons of it. His lungs must have been completely full. That wasn't the worst part. There were plants growing from his nostrils, tiny shoots of sphagnum moss, rooted in his sinuses like they'd been there for weeks. The county sheriff, Dale Morrison, no relation, hiked out that afternoon with 2 deputies. Dale was the kind of man who took up space, talked over people, made decisions without asking. He looked at the body, looked at me, and said, "You sure you didn't miss something?" CPR can be tricky for you ladies. I bit my tongue and showed him the scene, the impossible pool of water, the plants, the position of the body, arms spread, legs together, like someone had arranged him. "Copycat killer," Dale said immediately. Someone read about those old witch trials and got ideas. Probably some nut job from the city. "The witch trials involved women being drowned," I said. "This is a man. Nut jobs don't follow logic, ma'am." The deputies bagged the body and hauled it out. Dale told me to keep my camp where it was, said they might need me as a witness. Before he left, he stood too close and said, "You shouldn't be out here alone anyway. It's not safe for a woman." I watched them disappear down the trail and felt my hands shaking. Not from fear, from anger. I knew that tone. My ex-husband had used it. My dissertation advisor had used it. That careful condescension, that performance of concern that was really about control. I went back to my camp and tried to work, but my notes looked wrong. The handwriting was mine, but I didn't remember writing some of the passages. Details about the witch trials that I'd never researched. Names of the women, descriptions of how they died, court testimony I'd never read. Asterisk, Goody, Elizabeth Marsh, drowned in bog water 1647, testified against by her husband, who coveted her land. Asterisk. Asterisk, Sarah Whitcomb, healer, drowned 1649, after refusing marriage to local magistrate. Asterisk. Asterisk, Ann Carpenter, widow, drowned 1652 for teaching women to read. Asterisk. I pulled out my research files. thinking I must have copied this somewhere and forgotten. But the documents weren't in my handwriting at all. They were written in brown ink, in that old-fashioned script, and when I touched them, they felt damp. The paper should have been dry. My camp was dry. That night, I dreamed about drowning, about being held underwater by hands I couldn't see, bog water rushing into my lungs, voices above me saying words I couldn't understand. When I woke up, I was soaking wet, and there was mud on my sleeping bag. But it hadn't rained, and I hadn't left the tent. The second body turned up 2 days later, found by a day hiker who'd ignored the trail closure signs. Another man, same impossible drowning, same moss growing from inside him. This one had been positioned differently, kneeling, hands clasped, like he was praying. Dale came back out with more deputies. This time he brought Tom Hendricks, my supervisor, who took one look at the scene and started giving orders about securing the area and controlling information. I watched him walk around like he owned the place, telling me where to stand and what to document, his voice getting louder every time I tried to speak. "Rebecca, I need you to understand how serious this is," Tom said, standing between me and the body. "We can't have any mistakes in the investigation. Now, I know you're emotional. I'm not emotional. I'm an anthropologist examining. This isn't about your research anymore. This is about safety." He kept talking, but I wasn't listening. I was looking past him at the body, at the way the water around it was moving. The pool was shallow and still, no breeze, no current, but the surface was rippling in patterns, forming shapes, letters. The water was writing words. Asterisk, he claimed, ownership. He paid the price. Asterisk. I blinked, and the letters were gone, just normal ripples, and Tom was asking me if I was even paying attention. Dale was saying something about bringing in the FBI, about this being some kind of cult activity. Neither of them had seen the water move. Neither of them had seen the words. That night, I stayed up reading the documents that had appeared in my camp. Court records from 1,647, testimonies from witch trials, descriptions of how the women died. Every single one had been accused by a man, husband, father, employer, neighbor. Every single one had been killed for the same basic crime, not obeying. And every single one had drowned in this bog. The harvest moon was at its peak, turning everything silver and orange. I could see the will-o'-the-wisps again, dancing over the water. Except this time, I could see their shapes clearly. They were women in long dresses. Women with wet hair hanging in their faces. Women who turned and looked at me with eyes that reflected moonlight. I didn't sleep. I couldn't, because I knew, with that deep certainty that has nothing to do with logic or education, that they were real. And they were watching me. Tom decided to stay at my camp. "For your protection," he said, setting up his tent 10 feet from mine. Dale agreed it was a good idea, that I shouldn't be alone out here with a killer on the loose. I wanted to tell them both to leave, but something stopped me. Some instinct that said having witnesses might matter, even if those witnesses couldn't see what I was starting to see. Because the bog was changing, water levels rose and fell without any connection to rainfall. Equipment stopped working. My GPS would show coordinates for places that didn't exist, or suddenly display readings from 1,647. My thermometer registered impossible temperatures, 98.6 degrees in the bog water, body temperature, when it should have been maybe 50 degrees. My tape recorder was worst. I'd been using it to document my research, recording observations, and field notes. But when I played back the recordings, I'd hear other voices underneath mine. Women's voices, speaking in accents I didn't recognize, using words from centuries ago. Asterisk. Judgment was made by men who feared our knowledge. Asterisk. Asterisk. Drowned us like livestock, said we consorted with darkness. Asterisk. Asterisk. They took our land, our children, our names. Asterisk. I played one of the recordings for Tom. He listened, frowned, and said he didn't hear anything unusual, just me talking about water samples and vegetation patterns. But can't you hear the other voices? Rebecca, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should head back down to the station for a few days. I'm not crazy. No one said you were crazy, his tone suggested otherwise. But you've been alone out here for weeks. You found those bodies, and now you're hearing things. That's a perfectly normal stress response. He put his hand on my shoulder, and I shrugged it off harder than I meant to. His expression changed, hardened. "I'm trying to help you. I don't need that kind of help." He stared at me for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes. Something cold. Then he smiled, not a friendly smile, and said, "We'll talk about this later when you're calmer." That night, I woke up to voices. Real voices, not recordings. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent. Tom's tent was dark, but there were lights by the bog, dozens of them. That same willow, the wisp glow, but steady now, not dancing. I walked toward them. I should have been scared, but I wasn't. I felt pulled, like something was calling me home. The lights were women. I could see them clearly now, standing in the shallow water, wearing dresses from another century. Their faces were pale, their hair wet and dark, their eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. There were maybe 20 of them, all standing perfectly still, all watching me. One of them stepped forward. She was young, maybe my age, with a long dress and a white cap. When she spoke, her voice sounded like water over stones. "Dr. Morrison, daughter of Mary. We have been waiting." I should have run. Instead, I said, "Who are you?" We are the ones who were silenced. The healers, the teachers, the women who refused to submit. They called us witches. They drowned us here and took our names. She gestured at the bog around us. Our bodies fed this land. Our rage sustained us. And now, when the moon rises full and the old injustices repeat themselves, we rise too. The men who died were guilty. One beat his wife until she lost their child. Another stole credit for his female colleagues' research. All of them believed women existed to serve them. All of them learned otherwise. You killed them. We dispensed justice. She tilted her head. You understand. You have suffered under men like them. Your husband, who stole your words. Your supervisor, who questions your competence. The sheriff, who speaks to you like a child. She wasn't wrong. But that didn't make murder right. I can't let you keep killing people. You cannot stop us, but you can help us. She moved closer, and I could smell bog water and decay. You have the voice we lacked. The credentials, the authority. Tell our stories. Expose what was done to us. Give us the justice we were denied. And if I don't, then we will take what we need from you. Your body, your voice, your position. We have waited centuries. We will wait no longer. The other women moved closer, surrounding me. The water at my feet began to rise, cold and dark, soaking into my boots. I felt it pulling at me, trying to drag me down. Then a flashlight beam cut across the bog. Tom's voice, "Rebecca, what the hell are you doing?" I turned. He was standing at the edge of my camp, fully dressed, holding his flashlight and a hunting rifle I hadn't known he brought. When I looked back, the women were gone. Just willow, the wisps, just fog and moonlight. But the water was still rising around my feet. Tom walked toward me, his face twisted with anger. "I told you to stay in your tent. You can't just wander around in the dark. Someone could get hurt." I saw them, the women from the trials. They're real. Jesus Christ, Rebecca. He grabbed my arm, too tight. "You're having some kind of breakdown. We're going back to the station right now." I tried to pull away. His grip got tighter. "Let go of me. I'm trying to help you. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult?" The water around our feet began to bubble. Tom didn't seem to notice. "You need someone to take care of you," he said. "You can't be trusted to." The water erupted. It rose up in a column, 7 feet tall, taking the shape of a woman in a long dress. She was made entirely of bog water, debris, and moss, and when she moved, she made a sound like drowning. Tom finally let go of me. He raised the rifle, but before he could fire, the water woman reached out and touched his chest. He froze. His eyes went wide. Then he started screaming. Bog water poured from his mouth, his nose, his eyes. He fell to his knees, clawing at his throat, and the woman made of water leaned down and whispered something I couldn't hear. Tom collapsed. He wasn't dead. I could see him breathing, but he was unconscious, and bog plants were already starting to grow from his skin. The water woman turned to me. Her face shifted, becoming more solid, more human. I recognized her from the historical drawings in my research. Elizabeth Marsh, the first woman drowned in 1647. "Now you understand," she said. "Now you choose. Help us, or join him." I dragged Tom back to his tent, my hands shaking so hard I could barely grip his jacket. He was alive but deeply unconscious, his breathing shallow. tiny plants pushing through his skin like he'd been lying in the bog for weeks instead of minutes. I didn't call for help. The radio wouldn't work anyway, it never worked when I needed it, and I knew what I'd sound like if I tried to explain this. The crazy lady ranger having a breakdown in the wilderness. Instead, I went back to my tent and read everything I had on the witch trials. The real story was worse than I'd thought. 23 women drowned in this bog between 1,647 and 1,662. Not for practicing witchcraft, for owning property, for healing skills that made doctors jealous, for refusing marriage proposals from powerful men, for teaching other women to read. One was drowned for inheriting her father's business, another for testifying against a man who assaulted her. The trials were held by traveling magistrates who received payment for each conviction. The local men who accused the women got their property. Everyone profited except the women who died. It wasn't about fear of the supernatural. It was about control, about making sure women knew their place. And now, almost 400 years later, those women wanted payback. I understood it. God help me. Part of me even agreed with it. Every man they'd killed had hurt women. They were doing what the legal system wouldn't, holding abusers accountable. But it was still murder. It was still wrong, wasn't it? I sat in my tent as the sun came up, watching Tom breathe, watching the plants grow from his skin. He'd been condescending, controlling, dismissive, but did that mean he deserved to drown from the inside out? The documents in my research folder had multiplied overnight. More court testimonies, more names, more details of exactly how each woman died. At the bottom of the pile was something new, a list of names with dates next to them. Future dates. Next week, next month, next year. Every name was a man in a position of authority. Judges, police chiefs, park superintendents, professors. Men who had complaints filed against them by women, complaints that went nowhere. The spirits weren't just punishing the men who came to the bog, they were planning something bigger. And at the bottom of the list, in handwriting I recognized as my own but didn't remember writing, asterisk. Dr. Rebecca Morrison. Vessel and witness, asterisk. They wanted to use me. My credentials, my position, my body. They wanted to expand beyond the bog. To hunt down every man on that list, and they needed someone living to do it. The harvest moon would be at its peak tonight. That's when they'd try to possess me completely. I had maybe 12 hours to figure out what to do. Dale showed up at noon with 3 deputies and a detective from the state police. They'd found a third body downstream, another man, another impossible drowning. The detective was a woman in her 40s named Sarah Chen, and she listened to my explanation without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at Tom still unconscious in his tent, then back at me. Dr. Morrison, have you considered that you might be experiencing a psychotic break? Every second. But that doesn't explain the bodies, or Tom, or any of this. It could explain your perception of events. Then test the bog water. Check the plant growth rates on Tom's skin. None of this is possible through natural means. Dale cut in. What if she's the one doing it? Some kind of poison makes it look supernatural. She's the only one who's been here the whole time. I laughed. I couldn't help it. You think I'm a serial killer? I think you're a woman alone in the woods, hearing voices, finding bodies. Maybe you need attention. Maybe your ex-husband was right about. The ground shook. Water erupted from the bog, from the streams, from puddles that hadn't existed seconds before. It rose up in columns, dozens of them, all taking the shape of women in old-fashioned dresses. The deputies went for their guns. Dale was shouting into his radio. Detective Chen just stared, her hand frozen on her weapon. The water women didn't attack. They just stood there, surrounding us, waiting. Then Elizabeth Marsh stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice came from everywhere at once. You have run out of time, Dr. Morrison. Choose now. Be our voice, or be silenced with the rest. Rebecca, what the hell is happening? Sarah Chen whispered. The water women moved closer. I could feel their cold presence, smell the bog water and ancient rot. I could feel them reaching for me, trying to slide under my skin, to push my consciousness aside and take over. I had seconds to decide. I could fight them, try to refuse, try to escape, probably die in the process. I could let them win, give up my body, let them use me to hunt down every man on that list. Or I could find another way. My anthropology training kicked in. Cultural trauma doesn't heal through revenge, it heals through recognition. These women didn't just want blood. They wanted someone to say that what happened to them was wrong. "I'll tell your story," I said. "All of it. The real story, with names and dates and evidence. I'll publish it. I'll lecture on it. I'll make sure everyone knows what was done to you. Not as folklore, not as metaphor, but as historical fact." "Words change nothing," Elizabeth said. "Men do not listen to words from women's mouths. They'll listen to proof, to documents, to research, to academic papers they can't dismiss. I can give you something more permanent than revenge. I can give you truth." The water women moved closer still. I felt Elizabeth's presence in my mind, rifling through my memories, checking my sincerity. "And the guilty?" she asked. "The men who hurt women still? I'll expose them too. Everyone I can prove. Through legal means, through journalism, through testimony that courts can't ignore. But I won't let you commit murder. You would protect our oppressors. I would stop the cycle. You were killed by men who feared your power. If you become killers, you prove them right." The silence stretched out forever. The water women flickered, their forms losing cohesion. And I thought I'd failed, that they'd kill us all. Then Elizabeth said, "Show us." My hands moved without my permission, pulling out my laptop, opening files. The women gathered around, reading over my shoulder, not reading with eyes, but absorbing the information directly from my mind. I felt them sifting through everything I knew, everything I'd researched. "Yes," Elizabeth whispered, "this will suffice. But know this, Dr. Morrison, we will be watching. If you fail, if you remain silent, if men continue to hunt women as they hunted us, we will return. And next time, we will not ask permission." The water women dissolved, flowing back into the bog, leaving only ripples behind. Dale and his deputies were unconscious, knocked out by shock or supernatural intervention. I didn't know which. Detective Chen was still standing, still staring at where the women had been. "Did that really happen?" she asked. "Yes. Can you prove it?" "I'm going to try." Tom woke up 3 days later in the hospital with no memory of anything after setting up his tent. The plants growing from his skin had stopped, leaving tiny scars that the doctors couldn't explain. He was diagnosed with a rare fungal infection and severe dehydration, given antibiotics, and released after a week. He resigned from the Park Service a month later, took a desk job in Charleston, stopped going into the wilderness. He never spoke to me again. Dale and 2 of his deputies were found drowned in their squad car on the access road 3 days after the women appeared. The medical examiner ruled it impossible. The car was sealed, the windows up, but all 3 men had lungs full of bog water and sphagnum moss growing in their airways. The official report said carbon monoxide poisoning caused hallucinations and erratic behavior. It didn't explain the water. Detective Chen backed my story for what it was worth. She confirmed the supernatural encounter, submitted her testimony, and was promptly reassigned to desk duty pending psychiatric evaluation. We email sometimes. She's writing a book about unexplained deaths in wilderness areas. She believes me. Not many people do. The Cranberry Wilderness Bog was closed to the public for 6 months while teams of scientists studied the anomalous environmental conditions. They found nothing conclusive. High levels of methane, unusual electromagnetic readings, several plant species growing at impossible rates. Nothing that explained the deaths. My research was initially suppressed. The Park Service didn't want people connecting the bodies to historical witch trials. But I published it anyway, through academic journals that actually read the evidence. Gender-based persecution and judicial murder in colonial Appalachia, 1647 to 1662. It won awards, it made people angry. It told the truth. 23 women, named and documented. Their property stolen, their children taken, their lives ended by men who wanted to control them. Not one of them was guilty of anything except being female and inconvenient. The paper was picked up by mainstream historians, by feminist researchers, by journalists who started digging into similar cases across the Appalachians. We found dozens of forgotten witch trials, hundreds of murdered women, all of them following the same pattern. Woman has something a man wants, woman refuses or resists, woman gets accused of witchcraft. The pattern hasn't stopped, it just changed shape. I give lectures now, at universities, at conferences, at community centers. I tell the story of the Cranberry Bog witches, and I tell the stories of the women still dying because they said no to the wrong man. Some people think I'm crazy. Some people think I'm dangerous. Some people think I'm right. The bog is still there, still closed to the public, still monitored. Sometimes hikers ignore the warnings and go in anyway. Usually they come out fine, but not always. 3 men have died in that bog since October 1992. All of them had restraining orders filed against them by ex-wives or girlfriends. All of them drowned in impossible circumstances. The official explanation is always environmental hazards, poor judgment, tragic accidents. I know better. I go back twice a year, during the new moon, when the spirits are weakest, to check the water quality and document the ecosystem. The Park Service lets me because I'm the only expert who'll go there, and someone has to maintain the data. Last trip, I found fresh flowers laid at the edge of the bog. Wildflowers, tied with ribbon, arranged in a circle. No card, no name, but the ribbon was period accurate to the 1600s. The water was calm when I arrived. But as I worked, I felt presences watching me, not hostile, just observing. Making sure I kept my promise. I did keep it. I'm still keeping it. This is my testimony, my witness statement, my truth. Dr. Rebecca Morrison, ranger and anthropologist, reporting on events that cannot be explained by science but can be understood through history. The women in the Cranberry Bog were real. They were murdered. They came back. And they're still watching. If you're a man reading this, I hope you're listening. Because they're not the only ones. Up and down the Appalachians, in bogs and forests and forgotten places, spirits are waking up. Women who were silenced, who were killed, who are finally angry enough to do something about it. You can call it legend, you can call it folklore, you can call it mass hysteria or environmental toxins or whatever helps you sleep at night. But I was there. I saw them. I spoke with them. And I know they're coming back. The harvest moon rises every year. The bog water remembers. And the witches, the women who weren't witches at all, just human beings who deserve to live, they remember too. They remember everything. And they're done asking nicely. My name is Theodore Whitman, and I've been hunting killers for 20 years, 15 with the FBI, 5 as a park ranger. I've seen what people do to each other when they think nobody's watching, but I never found one that could take a man's bones while leaving everything else behind. December in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest gets quiet in ways that make your skin crawl. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until you start hearing things that aren't there. Or maybe they are there, and you just don't want to believe it. I was alone at the Looking Glass Rock Ranger Station, pulling holiday duty while the other guys went home to their families. Fine by me. I had nowhere else to go anyway, not since Sarah died. 23 years, married to a woman who understood why I came home late with blood on my clothes and nightmares in my head. Cancer took her 2 years back, right around the time I quit the bureau and came out here to these mountains. The call came in around 10 in the morning. Hikers found something up near Sliding Rock Falls. The voice on the radio was shaky Mike Henderson. I've been hiking these trails for 30 years. Ranger Whitman, you need to get up here. Found some folks. Well, what's left of them? I loaded my gear and drove up the winding mountain road. Ice from last week's freeze still clung to the rocks, making everything slippery and dangerous. The kind of weather that kills more people than bears or snakes ever do. Mike was waiting at the trailhead, face white as morning frost. Good man, solid. Not the type to spook easy. That's what worried me. How many? I asked, pulling on my pack. 3, maybe. Hard to tell. He swallowed hard. Ted, I've seen car crashes and hunting accidents. This ain't like anything I've ever seen. We hiked up through pine and oak, boots crunching on frozen leaves. The forest felt wrong somehow. Too quiet. No bird sounds, no squirrel chatter. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Right up here, Mike said, pointing to a clearing about 50 yards off the main trail. What I saw there broke every rule I'd learned about crime scenes in 15 years of federal law enforcement. 3 sleeping bags, laid out neat and tidy, like the campers had just stepped away for morning coffee. Except inside each bag was a pile of meat and organs, perfectly arranged, still wearing clothes, no bones anywhere, not a single one. No skulls, no ribs, no finger bones. Just soft tissue in the exact shape of human bodies, like someone had pulled out every piece of skeleton with surgical precision. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, pulling out my camera. I'd worked crime scenes where killers took trophies, fingers, teeth, sometimes hands, but this was impossible. You can't remove every bone from a human body without destroying everything else. There's no tool that could do it, no technique I'd ever heard of. The organs were intact, the skin unmarked except for small holes where major bones would connect to muscle. Mike threw up behind a tree. Can't say I blamed him. I spent 2 hours photographing everything, taking notes, looking for tracks or evidence. Nothing. The ground around the bodies was disturbed, but not in any pattern that made sense. Random scratches in the dirt, like something had been digging. But what could dig out human bones without disturbing anything else? "Mike, when did these folks check in at the visitor center?" 3 days ago. Young couple from Charlotte, and an older guy traveling alone. They had permits for backcountry camping. 3 days. In December weather, the bodies should have shown more decomposition. Instead, they looked fresh. Too fresh. And there were no flies, no insects at all. In my experience, bugs find dead bodies within hours. This clearing was sterile, like something had cleaned it. I called for the medical examiner and state police backup, then secured the scene with yellow tape. Standard procedure. But nothing about this felt standard. 20 years chasing killers, and I'd never seen anything like it. Walking back to my truck, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Scratched into the bark of an oak tree, about 8 feet up, were marks that looked almost like letters, like someone had carved a message with fingernails. Or finger bones. Hungry was scraped into the wood, fresh cuts that hadn't had time to heal over. I looked up at those letters and felt something I hadn't experienced since my rookie days with the Bureau. Pure, crawling fear. Because whatever had written that message had been tall enough to reach that high, and had fingers strong enough to carve through solid oak. Mike was already halfway back to his truck. Smart man, but I couldn't leave. This was my jurisdiction. My responsibility. Even if every instinct I'd developed over 2 decades was screaming at me to run. As I drove back down the mountain, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Not looking for other cars. Looking for something else. Something that might be watching me from between the trees. Something that knew I'd found its work. That night, in the ranger station, I spread out topographic maps of the area, marking the location where we'd found the bodies. Looking, Glass Rock sits right in the middle of some of the most rugged terrain in North Carolina. Granite cliffs, hidden valleys, caves that nobody had ever fully explored. The kind of place where something could hide for a very long time. I'd hunted serial killers before. Human monsters who did terrible things for reasons that made sense to them, if nobody else. But this felt different. This felt like something was hunting us. Dr. Emma Hayes arrived the next morning with the state medical examiner's team. I'd worked with her before on a drowning case last summer. Smart woman, thorough, not easily rattled. She took one look at the bodies and went pale. "Theodore, what are we dealing with here?" "Was hoping you could tell me." She knelt beside the first body, pulling on latex gloves. "I need to get these back to the lab, but initial examination shows no trauma to soft tissue. No cuts, no tears, no evidence of how the skeletal system was removed." She looked up at me. "This is medically impossible." While her team loaded the remains into body bags, I walked the perimeter again, looking for anything I'd missed. That's when I found the second site. About a quarter-mile deeper into the forest, hidden in a natural depression between 2 granite outcroppings, was another clearing. This one older. The bones were there, human skulls and rib cages and arm bones, all arranged in neat piles like someone was organizing a collection. I counted remains from at least 15 different people, some recent, some old enough to be yellowed with age. "Emma, you need to see this." She took photographs while I documented the scene. The bones were sorted by type, all the skulls in one pile, all the arm bones in another. Some showed cut marks, others looked like they'd been snapped cleanly in half. At the center of the arrangement was a circle of finger bones, pointing inward toward a small depression in the earth. "It's like a shrine," Emma said, "or a storage facility." I picked up one of the skulls for closer examination. Adult male, probably mid-30s, with a bullet hole in the back. But as I turned it over, something shifted inside. When I looked through the eye sockets, there were small bones rattling around in the brain cavity. Finger bones, but too small to be human. "Emma, look at this." Before she could respond, the skull started moving in my hands. Not falling apart, moving. The jaw opened and closed, like it was trying to speak. I dropped it, and it rolled away, still moving, jaw clicking against the ground. Emma stumbled backward. What the hell? All around us, the bone piles began to shift. Skulls turning to look at us. Finger bones crawling across the ground like spiders. Rib cages expanding and contracting like they were breathing. Emma grabbed my arm, her nails digging through my jacket. "We need to leave. Now." I drew my service weapon standard. .40 caliber Glock that had served me well for 15 years. But what do you shoot when the target is already dead? I aimed at the nearest skull, the one that had been in my hands, and pulled the trigger. The bullet shattered bone into white fragments, but the pieces kept moving, scattered finger bones still crawling toward us. Emma was backing away, her equipment scattered on the ground. "The truck," I said, "move." We ran through the forest, branches catching at our clothes, boots slipping on ice. Behind us, I could hear clicking and clattering, like hundreds of bones knocking together. Emma fell once, scraped her knee bloody on a rock, but I hauled her up and kept us moving. At the truck, I looked back toward the clearing. Something was moving between the trees, tall shapes that walked upright but didn't look quite right. Too thin, too angular. When they stepped into patches of sunlight, I could see through them to the forest beyond. "Drive," Emma said. "Please, just drive." I started the engine and headed back toward town, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. In 20 years of law enforcement, I'd never run from anything. Drug dealers, armed robbers, killers with nothing left to lose, I'd faced them all down. But this was different. You can't arrest something that's already dead. "Emma, what did we just see?" She was staring out the passenger window, her face white. "I don't know. But those bones, some of them were old, really old. Civil War era, maybe older. That got my attention." "How can you tell?" "Bone density, weathering patterns, the way they've yellowed." "Theodore, some of those skeletons have been there for over 100 years. But they were moving like they'd just died yesterday." Back at the ranger station, I pulled out historical records for the area. During the Civil War, Looking Glass Rock had been used as a hideout by deserters from both armies. Men who'd run from battles, living rough in the mountains. According to local records, a group of Confederate deserters had been found dead in a cave system near Sliding Rock Falls in 1863. 17 men, all showing signs of extreme starvation. The report noted something strange. Several of the bodies showed evidence of having been fed upon by the others. Human bite marks on arm and leg bones. The surviving members of the group had apparently turned to cannibalism before finally starving to death themselves. I cross-referenced the dates with Cherokee tribal records from the 1800s. The Cherokee had avoided that area even before white settlers arrived, calling it the place where the hungry dead walk. Their stories spoke of spirits that could never be satisfied, no matter how much they consumed. Emma called around 8 that evening. "Theodore, you're not going to believe this." I was examining the soft tissue samples under a microscope, and they started moving. While I was watching them, dead cells don't do that. What kind of moving? Reorganizing themselves, forming patterns. And Theodore, they were spelling out words. My blood went cold. What words? "Feed you us." Over and over again. "Feed you us." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk with every light in the station turned on, service weapon loaded and within reach. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. But underneath the wind, I could hear something else. Clicking sounds. Bone against bone, and footsteps that sounded wrong, too light, like something walking that didn't have enough weight to make proper tracks. Around 3 in the morning, something scratched at the door. I called out twice, "Who's there?" "Park Service, identify yourself," but got no answer, just more scratching, deliberate and rhythmic, like fingernails on wood, but too loud, too sharp. Through the window, I could see a shape pressed against the glass. Tall and impossibly thin, wearing what looked like an old military uniform. But where the face should have been, there was just empty space. A skull with dark sockets that seemed to look right through me. I grabbed my flashlight and spotlight, flooding the area with light. The shape vanished, but scratched into the door were fresh letters. "Return what you took." The skull I'd handled at the bone site. It wanted me to bring it back. By morning, I'd made a decision that went against every bit of training I'd ever received. I was going back to that clearing, armed and prepared. Whatever was happening in these mountains, it had to be stopped. More hikers would come, more people would die. That was my job, protecting people from threats in the national forest. Even threats that shouldn't exist. I loaded my truck with emergency flares, extra ammunition, a portable radio, and a digital camera with night vision capability. If this thing was real, I was going to document it. If it wasn't, then I was losing my mind, and the evidence would help the next ranger understand what had happened to me. Emma insisted on coming along, bringing equipment to take tissue samples and photographs. Against my better judgment, I let her. She was a doctor, a scientist. If anyone could figure out what we were dealing with, it was her. We reached the first clearing around noon. The bodies were gone. The medical examiner's team had removed them yesterday, but the area still felt wrong. No insects, no bird sounds. Even the wind seemed muffled here. Temperatures 15 degrees colder than it should be, Emma said, checking her thermometer. And look at this. She knelt by where the bodies had been found. The ground was covered with a fine white powder that looked like crushed bone. I took photographs while Emma collected samples. That's when we heard the singing. Faint at first, like a whisper on the wind, but it got louder, clearer. Men's voices harmonizing in a song I didn't recognize. Old-fashioned, with the kind of melody you might hear in a church or around a campfire. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the granite cliffs. "It's Hard Times Come Again No More," Emma said. Stephen Foster song, popular during the Civil War. The singing stopped abruptly, leaving a silence so complete it hurt my ears. Then, from the direction of the bone site, came the sound of marching. Boots on frozen ground, moving in military formation. We followed the sound deeper into the forest. The temperature kept dropping as we walked, our breath forming clouds in air that should have been warm for December. Ice began forming on tree branches, though the sun was still shining. At the bone clearing, we found them. 17 skeletal figures in Confederate military uniforms, standing in perfect formation, some missing pieces, an arm here, a leg there, but all maintaining military posture. Their uniforms were faded, gray wool, buttons tarnished with age. Where their faces should have been, empty skulls turned to watch our approach. The one in front, wearing sergeant's stripes, stepped forward and pointed at me with a finger bone. When he spoke, his voice came from everywhere at once, echoing in my chest. "You took from us." I raised my hands, showing empty palms. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'll return what I took." Not enough, never enough. Always hungry. The skeletons began to move, spreading out to surround us. They moved with purpose, with intelligence. These weren't mindless monsters. They were soldiers, following orders from something that remembered how to think and plan. Emma grabbed my arm. "Theodore, look at their bones." She was right. The skeletons weren't complete. They were made up of bones from dozens of different people, different sizes, different ages. The sergeant had the skull of an old man, but the leg bones of someone much younger. They were building themselves from whatever they could find, creating new bodies from their collection. "Run," one of them whispered. "Make us chase. We like the chase." We ran, through pine groves and over rocky streams, with the sound of pursuit close behind. But they weren't trying to catch us, they were herding us, driving us toward something specific. Every time I tried to change direction, one of them would appear, forcing us back onto their chosen path. We emerged into a valley I'd never seen before, though I'd studied every map of this area. It was impossible, a hidden depression, surrounded by granite cliffs, accessible only through a narrow passage between the rocks. At the center of the valley was a cave entrance, dark and uninviting. "Welcome home," the sergeant said, appearing behind us. "Join the hungry." Inside the cave, I could see them, hundreds of skeletons, all wearing different period clothing, Civil War uniforms, Revolutionary War gear, even what looked like colonial dress. Some still had flesh clinging to their bones, fresh kills from recent hikers. Others were ancient, held together by something other than muscle and tendon. "How many people have disappeared in these mountains?" I asked Emma. "Over the last 150 years? Hundreds, maybe thousands." She was examining one of the skeletons with scientific detachment, even in our current situation. "Theodore, look at the bone wear patterns. These things have been active for decades, constantly moving, constantly hunting. The sergeant's skeleton pointed toward the cave entrance. Inside. You feed us or join us? Choose now. I drew my service weapon and aimed at his skull. Third option. The bullet shattered his head into fragments, but the body kept moving. The pieces of skull began crawling back together on the ground, rebuilding themselves from bone dust and fragments. Bullets cannot kill the already dead. That's when I saw him. Standing at the back of the group, wearing a modern FBI windbreaker and familiar brown hair. My former partner, Agent David Ross, who'd been killed 3 years ago during a raid on a drug operation in Tennessee. His skeleton turned to look at me, and when he spoke, it was in David's voice. "Hello, Ted. I've been waiting for you." "David died in Memphis," I said, my voice shaking. "Buried him myself." "Death is not the end here," the sergeant replied. "We take all bones, all flesh, add to the hungry." David's skeleton stepped forward, still wearing his FBI badge on bone-white ribs. "You remember our last case together, Ted? The cannibal killer in Louisiana?" I was wrong about him. He wasn't crazy. He was preparing. Getting ready for this. Emma pulled out a small digital recorder and began taking notes, even as skeletal hands reached for us from all directions. "Theodore, they're not just animated bones. They're retaining memories, personalities. The consciousness is tied to the bone marrow somehow." "The marrow holds the soul," David's skeleton confirmed. "That's why we take it, why we're never satisfied. Each person we consume makes us more than we were." I backed toward the cave entrance, keeping my weapon aimed at the approaching figures. Inside the cave, I could see the source of their power, a massive pile of human skulls, thousands of them, stacked into a pyramid that reached almost to the cave ceiling. At the base of the pyramid, fresh bones still wet with marrow and blood. This is how it started, I realized. Those Confederate deserters, they turned to cannibalism to survive, and when they died, the hunger didn't die with them. "Exactly," the sergeant confirmed. "We learned to take what we needed from the living, and the more we took, the stronger we became." The skeletal figures began closing in, moving with coordinated precision. Military training that had survived death and decay. David's skeleton reached out with familiar gestures, the way he used to motion me forward during raids. "Come on, partner. One more case to solve together. Forever." That's when I noticed something Emma had missed. The bone pyramid wasn't just random skulls, it was organized, arranged in layers by time period, with the oldest bones at the bottom and the newest at the top. And at the very apex of the pyramid was a single skull wearing a Confederate sergeant's hat. "You're their leader," I said to the sergeant. "The first one to die, the first one to come back, destroy you, and the rest fall apart." "Perhaps, but first you must reach me." He was right. Between me and the pyramid were 17 skeletal soldiers, plus David, plus dozens of other figures from different time periods. All of them standing between me and their source of power. Emma grabbed my arm. "Theodore, fire." These things are held together by bone connections, ligaments made of dried marrow. Fire would destroy those connections. The emergency flares in my pack. I'd brought them for signaling, but they burned hot enough to melt bone. I pulled out a flare and struck it, filling the cave with brilliant red light. The skeletons recoiled, their forms seeming less solid in the bright glare. I threw the flare at the base of the bone pyramid, and immediately several skulls cracked and fell apart. The sergeant let out a scream that shook dust from the cave ceiling. "Stop. You do not understand. We are part of this place now. Destroy us, and the mountains themselves will hunger." I lit another flare, maybe. But that's not my problem today. The fire spread quickly through the dry bones, consuming marrow and cartilage that had somehow preserved itself for over a century. Skeleton after skeleton collapsed into dust as their connections burned away. David's remains fell last, his FBI windbreaker fluttering to the cave floor like a flag of surrender. But the sergeant's skeleton was fighting back. As the fire reached the top of the pyramid, his bones began to glow with an internal light. He grew larger, drawing mass from the remains around him, building himself into something that had never been human. "If we cannot have you," he roared, "we will have the mountain." The cave began to shake. Rocks fell from the ceiling as something underground stirred to life. Through cracks in the cave floor, I could see movement, massive bones, far too large to be human. The mountain itself was waking up. Emma and I ran for the cave entrance as the roof began to collapse. Behind us, the bone pyramid exploded in a burst of fire and light, sending the sergeant's remains scattering across the cave floor. His final scream followed us out of the valley, echoing off granite cliffs until it faded into silence. We climbed out of the hidden valley just as the entire area collapsed into itself, taking the cave and its contents down into the earth. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but a depression in the ground and the smell of burning bone. "Is it over?" Emma asked. I looked back at where the valley had been, then at the forest around us. Birds were singing again. The temperature had returned to normal. Even the wind sounded different, cleaner somehow. "For now," I said, "but there are other mountains, other battlefields where hungry men died badly." That's when I made my decision. The Park Service needed someone who understood what they might be dealing with, someone who'd seen the impossible and lived to tell about it, someone who knew how to fight things that couldn't be arrested or prosecuted. I was no longer hunting human monsters. I was hunting something much worse. The official report listed 14 confirmed deaths over a 6-month period, all attributed to an unknown serial killer with advanced surgical knowledge. The cave collapse was blamed on unstable geological conditions, exacerbated by recent freeze-thaw cycles. Emma's tissue samples were destroyed in a lab fire that investigators called suspicious, but not arson. I kept my mouth shut and my gun loaded. 6 months later, I was transferred to Yellowstone as a special consultant for unusual wildlife incidents. Funny how they phrased it. Turned out, the Park Service had been dealing with things like the bone collectors for decades. They just didn't talk about it much. My new partner is a Shoshone ranger named Maria Santos, who's seen things that would make the bone collectors look like a nature documentary. She taught me that some mountains are alive in ways that science hasn't figured out how to measure yet. And some of them are hungry. We got called to investigate a missing hiking party last week. Found them at the bottom of a canyon, every single bone in their bodies broken in exactly the same pattern. Maria took one look and said, "Thunderbird feeding site. We'll need the big flares for this one." I asked her how long she'd been dealing with impossible things. "Since my grandfather taught me to see what's really out there," she said. "Question is, how long have you been pretending they didn't exist?" Good question. Looking back, I can remember cases from my FBI days that never quite made sense. The family in Oregon, where all the mirrors in the house had been broken from the inside. The serial killer in Kansas, who claimed his victims were still talking to him from beyond the grave, and somehow knew details about new murders before they happened. Maybe I'd been hunting monsters my whole career. I just hadn't known what I was looking at. Emma calls me sometimes, usually late at night. She's working as a forensic consultant now, specializing in unusual death investigations. Last month, she examined a body found in a Minnesota state park. All the bones had been perfectly cleaned of flesh, but the skeleton was still alive, still moving. She had to burn it with a welding torch before it stopped trying to escape the morgue. "How many are out there, Theodore?" she asked during our last conversation. "More than we thought," I told her, "but fewer than there used to be. That's the thing about hunting monsters, human or otherwise. Every one you stop means someone else gets to go home safe. Every impossible thing you burn means the world stays a little bit more normal for everyone else." I still carry flares in my pack. Still sleep with a loaded weapon within reach. And when hikers ask me about strange stories they've heard about these mountains, I tell them the truth. Stay on marked trails, camp only in designated areas, and if you hear singing in the woods after dark, start walking toward the nearest road, and don't stop until you reach it. Some of them listen, some don't. But the ones who do listen get to tell their own stories later. About the time they almost walked into something impossible, and a crazy old ranger's advice saved their lives. That's enough for me. My name is Theodore Whitman. I hunt monsters in America's national parks. And I sleep just fine at night, knowing that somewhere out there, the hungry dead are waiting. But tonight, they'll have to keep waiting.